Scientology, a new slant on life by L. Ron Hubbard. Introduction. Who are you anyway? Where do you come from? What will happen to you? Are you a product of the mud, as you have been told, to exist for a few years and then wither away and fertilize the earth from which they said you came? Or are you something better, something finer? What are your goals? Where are you going? Why are you here? What are you? Scientology has answers to these questions, good answers that are true, answers that work for you. For the subject matter of Scientology is you. L. Ron Hubbard. Is it possible to be happy? Is it possible to be happy? A great many people wonder whether or not happiness even exists in this modern, rushing world. Very often, an individual can have $1 million. He can have everything his heart apparently desires and is still unhappy. We take the case of somebody who has worked all his life. He's worked hard. He's raised a big family. He's looked forward to that time of his life when he, at last, could retire and be happy and be cheerful and have lots of time to do all the things he wanted to do. And then we see him after he's retired, and is he happy? No. He's sitting there thinking about the good old days when he was working hard. Our main problem in life is happiness. The world today may or may not be designed to be a happy world. It may or may not be possible for you to be happy in this world. And yet, nearly all of us have the goal of being happy and cheerful about existence. And then, very often, we look around at the world around us and say, well, nobody could be happy in this place. We look at the dirty dishes in the sink and the car needing a coat of paint and the fact that we need a new gas heater, we need a new coat, we need new shoes, or we'd just like to have better shoes and say, well, how could anybody possibly be happy when actually he can't have everything he wants? He's unable to do all the things he'd like to do, and therefore, this environment doesn't permit a person to be as happy as he could be. Well, I'll tell you a funny thing. A lot of philosophers have said this many, many times. But the truth of the matter is that all the happiness you will ever find lies in you. You remember when you were maybe 5 years old and you went out in the morning and you looked at the day, and it was a very, very beautiful day. You looked at flowers, and they were very beautiful flowers. 25 years later, you get up in the morning, you take a look at the flowers. They are wilted. The day isn't a happy day. Well, what's changed? You know they are the same flowers. It's the same world. Something must have changed. Well, probably it was you. Actually, a little child derives all of his pleasure in life from the grace he puts upon life. He waves a magic hand and turns all manner of interesting things into being out in the society. Where does he do this? He goes down and he looks at the cop. Here's this big, strong brute of a man riding this iron steed, up and down. Boy, he'd like to be a cop. Yes, sir, he'd sure like to be a cop. 25 years later, he looks at that cop riding up and down, checking his speedometer, and says, doggone these cops. Well, what's changed here? Has the cop changed? No, just the attitude toward the cop. One's attitude toward life makes every possible difference in one's living. You know, you don't have to study 1,000 ancient books to discover that fact. But sometimes it needs to be pointed out again that life doesn't change so much as you. Once upon a time, perhaps, you were thinking of being married and having a nice home and having a nice family, and everything would be just right. And the husband would come home, you see, and you'd put dinner on the table, and everybody would be happy about the whole thing. And then you got married, and it maybe didn't quite work out. Somehow or other, he comes home late. He's had an argument with the boss, and he doesn't feel well. He doesn't want to go to the movies, and he doesn't see how you have any work to do anyhow. After all, you just sit home all day and do nothing. And you know he doesn't do any work either. He disappears out of the house. He's gone and he comes back later in the evening, and he hasn't done anything either. Quite an argument could ensue over this, and actually both of you have worked quite hard. Well, what do we do in a condition like this? Do we just break up the marriage? Or touch a match to the whole house? Or throw the kids in the garbage can and go home to mama? Or what do we do? Well, there are many, many, many things we could do, and the least of them is to take a look at the environment. Just look around and say, where am I? What am I doing here? And then once you found out where you were, why, try to find out how you could make that a little more habitable. The day when you stop building your own environment, when you stop building your own surroundings, when you stop waving a magic hand and gracing everything around you with magic and beauty, things cease to be magical. Things cease to be beautiful. Well, maybe you've just neglected somewhere back in the last few years to wave that magic hand. Other people seek happiness in various ways. They seek it hectically. It's as though it is some sort of a mechanism that exists. It's made up. Maybe it's a little machine. Maybe it's something that's parked in a cupboard, or maybe happiness is down at the next corner. Maybe it's someplace else. They're looking for something. Well, the odd part of it is, the only time they'll ever find something is when they put it there first. Now, this doesn't seem very creditable, but it is quite true. Those people who have become unhappy about life are unhappy about life solely and completely because life has ceased to be made by them. Here we have the single difference in a human being. We have that human being who is unhappy, miserable, and isn't getting along in life, who is sick, who doesn't see brightness. Life is handling, running, changing, making him. Here we have somebody who is happy, who is cheerful, who is strong, who finds there is something worth doing in life. What do we discover in this person? We find out that he is making life. Now, there is actually the single difference. Are you making life, or is life making you? And when we go into this, we find out that a person has stopped making life because he himself has decided that life cannot be made. Some failure, some small failure, maybe not graduating with the same class, maybe that failure that had to do with not marrying quite the first man or woman who came along and seemed desirable, maybe the failure of having lost a car, or just some minor thing in life started this attitude. A person looked around one day and said, "Well, I've lost." And after that, life makes him. He doesn't make life anymore. Well, this would be a very dreadful situation if nothing could be done about it. But the fact of the matter is, it's the easiest problem of all the problems man faces. Changing himself and changing the attitudes of those around him. It's very, very easy to change somebody else's attitude, yet you are totally dependent upon other people's attitudes. Somebody's attitude toward you may make or break your life. Did it ever occur to you that your home holds together probably because of the attitude the other person has toward you? So there's two problems here. You have to change two attitudes. One, your attitude toward somebody else, and two, their attitude toward you. Well, are there ways to do these things? Yes. Fortunately, there are. For many, many, many centuries, man has desired to know how to change the mind and condition of himself and his fellows. Actually, man hadn't accumulated enough information to do this up to relatively few years ago. But we're living in a very fast-paced world. We're living in a world where magic is liable to occur at any time, and has. Man now understands a great many things about the universe he lives in which he never understood before. And amongst the things which he now understands is the human mind. The human mind is not an unsolved problem. 19th century psychology did not solve the problem. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been solved. In modern times, the most interesting miracles are taking place all across this country and across the other continents of Earth. What do these miracles consist of? They consist of people becoming well. It consists of people who were unhappy becoming happy once more. It consists of abolishing the danger inherent in many of the illnesses and in many of the conditions of man. And yet, the answer has been with man all the time. Man has been able to reach out and find this answer, but perhaps man himself had to change. Perhaps he had to come up into modern times to find out that the physical universe was not composed of demons and ghosts to outlive his superstitions, to outlive the ignorance of his forebears. Perhaps he had to do everything, including invent the atom bomb, before he could find himself. Well, he has pretty well mastered the physical universe now. The physical universe is to him now rather a pawn. He can do many things with it, and having conquered that, he can now conquer himself. The truth of the matter is, he has conquered himself. Scientology came about because of man's increased knowledge of energy. Man became possessed of more information about energy than he had ever had before in all of his history. And amongst that, he came into possession of information about the energy which is his own mind. The body is an energy mechanism. Naturally, a person who cannot handle energy could not handle a body. He would be tired, he would be upset, he would be unhappy. As he looks all around him, he finds nothing but energy. If he knew a great deal about energy, particularly the energy of himself, the energy that made him think, the energy that was himself, and the space which surrounded him, he, of course, would know himself. And that, in the final essence, has been his goal for many thousands of years, to know himself. Scientology has made it possible for him to do so. Scientology, an overview. Personal integrity. What is true for you is what you have observed yourself. And when you lose that, you have lost everything. What is personal integrity? Personal integrity is knowing what you know. What you know is what you know, and to have the courage to know and say what you have observed. And that is integrity, and there is no other integrity. Of course, we can talk about honor, truth, nobility, all these things as esoteric terms. But I think they would all be covered very well if what we really observed was what we observed, that we took care to observe what we were observing, that we always observed to observe, and not necessarily maintaining a skeptical attitude, a critical attitude, or an open mind. Not necessarily maintaining these things at all, but certainly maintaining sufficient personal integrity and sufficient personal belief and confidence in self and courage that we can observe what we observe and say what we have observed. Nothing in Scientology is true for you unless you have observed it, and it is true according to your observation. That is all. A description of Scientology. Scientology is the science of knowing how to know answers. It is an organized system of axioms and processes which resolve the problems of existence. A Scientologist is a specialist in spiritual and human affairs. Scientology is organized from the viewpoint of the spirit and contains a precise and usable definition of the spirit, and charts and studies, and is capable of changing the behavior of the spirit. Scientology is formed in the tradition of 10,000 years of religious philosophy, and considers itself a culmination of the searches which began with the Veda, the Tao, Buddhism, Christianity, and other religions. Scientology is a Gnostic faith in that it knows it knows. This is its distinguishing characteristic from most of its predecessors. Scientology can demonstrate that it can attain the goals set for man by all religions, which are wisdom, good health, and immortality. By spiritual means, but means which are as precise as mathematics, a host of the bad conditions of life may be remedied in Scientology. Illness and malfunction can be divided into two general classes. First, those resulting from the operation of the spirit directly upon the communication networks of life or the body, and those occasioned by the disruption of structure through purely physical causes. Unhappiness, inability to heal, and psychosomatic illness, which include some 70% of the illnesses of man, are best healed by immediate address of the human spirit. Illness caused by recognizable bacteria and injury in accident are best treated by physical means, and these fall distinctly into the field of medicine and are not the province of Scientology, except that accidents and illness and bacterial infection are predetermined in almost all cases by spiritual malfunction and unrest, and conditions in accidents are definitely prolonged by any spiritual malfunction. Thus, we have the field of medicine addressing the immediate injury, such surgical matters as birth and acute infection, and such things as contusions and abrasions resulting from accidents, as well as the administration of drugs and antibiotics to prevent the demise of the patient in a crisis. This is the role of medicine. Where predisposition to disease or injury exists, or where disease or injury is being prolonged, or where unhappiness and worry cause mental or physical upset, or where we desire to better and improve communications or social relationships, we are dealing, if we are efficient, in the realm of Scientology. For such things are best healed or best prevented or best remedied by immediate and direct recourse to the spirit and its action and determinism of the course of the body. The only truly therapeutic agent in this universe is the spirit. In Scientology, this has been demonstrated with more thoroughness and exists with more certainty than the physical sciences or mathematics. A Scientologist can make an individual well, happy, and grant him personal immortality simply by addressing the human spirit. For more than 10,000 years, man has been accumulating material toward this goal, but it required a wide understanding of the philosophies and processes of Asia and a thorough indoctrination in the Western physical sciences and mathematics to bring about the precision existing in Scientology when practiced properly by a trained Scientologist. It could be said with Scientology that we have entered the second age of miracles. It is a discovery of Scientology, a discovery susceptible to the most arduous scientific proofs, that people are not bodies, but that people are living units operating bodies. The living unit we call, in Scientology, a thetan, that being taken from the Greek letter theta, the mathematical symbol used in Scientology to indicate the source of life and life itself. The individual, the person, the actual identity is this living unit. It is modified by the addition of a body, and by the addition of a body it is brought into a certain unknowingness about its own condition. The mission of Scientology is to raise the knowingness of this spirit to such a degree that it again knows what it is and what it is doing. And in this state, the thetan can apply directly to his own body or to his environment or to the bodies of others the healing skill of which he is capable. It is the thetan which builds and constructs. It is the thetan which forms actual forms and organisms. Among the capabilities and potentials of the thetan is immortality in full knowingness of his own identity. The amount of time which he has spent on earth and the number of deaths through which he has gone have brought him into a state of forgetfulness about who and where he has been. This material is recovered in Scientology if the Scientologist specifically processes toward it. How to study Scientology. The first thing that a student has to find out for himself and then recognize is that he is dealing with precision tools. It isn't up to someone else to force this piece of information on him. The whole subject of Scientology, as far as the student is concerned, is as good or bad in direct ratio to his knowledge of it. It is up to a student to find out how precise these tools are. He should, before he starts to discuss, criticize, or attempt to improve on the data presented to him, find out for himself whether or not the mechanics of Scientology are as stated and whether or not it does what has been proposed for it. He should make up his mind about each thing that is taught, the procedure, techniques, mechanics, and theory. He should ask himself these questions. Does this piece of data exist? Is it true? Does it work? Will it produce the best possible results in the shortest time? There is a way to answer these questions to his own satisfaction. Find them himself. These are fundamentals, and every student should undertake to discover them himself, thus raising Scientology above an authoritarian category. It is not sufficient that an instructor stand before him and declare the existence of these. Each and every student must determine for himself whether or not the instructor's statements are true. There are two ways men ordinarily accept things, neither of them very good. One is to accept a statement because authority says it is true and must be accepted, and the other is by preponderance of agreement amongst other people. Preponderance of agreement is all too often the general public test for sanity or insanity. Suppose someone were to walk into a crowded room and suddenly point to the ceiling, saying, "Oh, look, there's a huge 12-foot spider on the ceiling." Everyone would look up, but no one else would see the spider. Finally, someone would tell him so. "Oh, yes, there is," he would declare, and become very angry when he found that no one would agree with him. If he continued to declare his belief in the existence of the spider, he would very soon find himself institutionalized. The basic definition of sanity in this somewhat nebulously learned society is whether or not a person agrees with everyone else. It is a very sloppy manner of accepting evidence, but all too often it is the primary measuring stick. And then the rule of authority. Does Dr. J. Doe agree with your proposition? No? Then of course it cannot be true. Dr. Doe is an eminent authority in the field. A man by the name of Galen at one time dominated the field of medicine. Another man by the name of Harvey upset Galen's cozy position with a new theory of blood circulation. Galen had been agreeing with the people of his day concerning the tides of the blood. They knew nothing about heart action. They accepted everything they had been taught and did little observing of their own. Harvey worked at the Royal Medical Academy and found by animal vivisection the actual function of the heart. He had the good sense to keep his findings absolutely quiet for a while. Leonardo da Vinci had somehow discovered or postulated the same thing, but he was a crazy artist, and no one would believe an artist. Harvey was a member of the audience of a play by Shakespeare in which the playwright made the same observation. But again, the feeling that artists never contribute anything to society blocked anyone but Harvey from considering the statement as anything more than fiction. Finally, Harvey made his announcement. Immediately, dead cats, rotten fruit, and pieces of wine jugs were hurled in his direction. He raised quite a commotion in medical and social circles until finally, in desperation, one doctor made the historical statement that, "I would rather err with Galen than be right with Harvey." Man would have made an advance of exactly 0 if this had always been the only method of testing evidence. But every so often during man's progress, there have been rebels who were not satisfied with preponderance of opinion and who tested a fact for themselves, observing and accepting the data of their observation and then testing again. Possibly the first man who made a flint axe looked over a piece of flint and decided that the irregular stone could be chipped a certain way. When he found that flint would chip easily, he must have rushed to his tribe and enthusiastically tried to teach his fellow tribesmen how to make axes in the shape they desired instead of spending months searching for accidental pieces of stone of just the right shape. The chances are he was stoned out of camp. Indulging in a further flight of fancy, it is not difficult to imagine that he finally managed to convince another fellow that his technique worked, and that the two of them tied down a third with a piece of vine and forced him to watch them chip a flint axe from a rough stone. Finally, after convincing 15 or 20 tribesmen by forceful demonstration, the followers of the new technique declared war on the rest of the tribe and, winning, forced the tribe to agree by decree. Evaluation of data. Man has never known very much about that with which his mind is chiefly filled: data. What is data? What is the evaluation of data? All these years in which psychoanalysis has taught its tenets to each generation of doctors, the authoritarian method was used, as can be verified by reading a few of the books on the subject. Within them is found, interminably, Freud said. The truly important thing is not that Freud said a thing, but is the data valuable? If it is valuable, how valuable is it? You might say that a datum is as valuable as it has been evaluated. A datum can be proved in ratio to whether it can be evaluated by other data, and its magnitude is established by how many other data it clarifies. Thus, the biggest datum possible would be one which would clarify and identify all knowledge known to man in the material universe. Unfortunately, however, there is no such thing as a prime datum. There must be not one datum, but two data, since a datum is of no use unless it can be evaluated. Furthermore, there must be a datum of similar magnitude with which to evaluate any given datum. Data is your data only so long as you have evaluated it. It is your data by authority, or it is your data. If it is your data by authority, somebody has forced it upon you. Of course, if you asked a question of a man whom you thought knew his business and he gave you his answer, that datum was not forced upon you. But if you went away from him believing from then on that such a datum existed without taking the trouble to investigate the answer for yourself, without comparing it to the known universe, you were falling short of completing the cycle of learning. Mechanically, the major thing wrong with the mind is, of course, the turbulence in it. But the overburden of information in this society is enforced education that the individual has never been permitted to test. Literally, when you are told not to take anyone's word as an absolute datum, you are being asked to break a habit pattern forced upon you when you were a child. Your instructor in Scientology could have told you what he found to be true and invite you to test it for yourself. But unless you have tested it, you very likely do not have the fundamentals of Scientology in mind well enough to be comfortable in the use of any or all of the techniques available to you. This is why theory is so heavily stressed in Scientology. The instructor can tell you what he has found to be true and what others have found to be true, but at no time should he ask you to accept it. Please allow a plea otherwise. Test it for yourself and convince yourself whether or not it exists as truth. And if you find that it does exist, you will be comfortable thereafter. Otherwise, unrecognized even by yourself, you are likely to find down at the bottom of your information and education an unresolved question which will itself undermine your ability to assimilate or practice anything in the line of a technique. Your mind will not be as facile on the subject as it should be. Any quarrel you may have with theory is something that only you can resolve. Is the theory correct or isn't it correct? Only you can answer that. It cannot be answered for you. You can be told what others have achieved in the way of results and what others have observed, but you cannot become truly educated until you have achieved the results for yourself. The moment a man opens his mouth and asks, "Where is validation?" you can be sure you are looking at a very stupid man. That man is saying bluntly and abruptly, "I cannot think for myself. I have to have authority." Where could he possibly look for validation except into the physical universe and into his own subjective and objective reality? A look at the sciences. Unfortunately, we are surrounded by a world that calls itself a world of science. But it is a world that is, in actuality, a world of authority. True, that which is science today is far, far in advance of the Hindu concept of the world, wherein a hemisphere rested on the backs of 7 elephants, which stood on 7 pillars that stood on the back of a mud turtle, below which was mud into infinity. The reason engineering and physics have reached out so far in advance of other sciences is the fact that they pose problems which punish man so violently if he doesn't look carefully into the physical universe. An engineer is faced with the problem of drilling a tunnel through a mountain for a railroad. Tracks are laid up to the mountain on either side. If he judges space wrongly, the two tunnel entrances would fail to meet on the same level in the center. It would be so evident to one and all concerned that the engineer made a mistake, that he takes great care not to make such a mistake. He observes the physical universe not only to the extent that the tunnel must meet to a fraction of an inch, but to the extent that if he were to misjudge wrongly the character of the rock through which he drills, the tunnel would cave in, an incident which would be considered a very unlucky and unfortunate occurrence to railroading. Biology comes closer to being a science than some others because, in the field of biology, if someone makes too big a mistake about a bug, the immediate result can be dramatic and terrifying. Suppose a biologist is charged with the responsibility of injecting plankton into a water reservoir. Plankton are microscopic germs that are very useful to man. But if, through some mistake, the biologist injects typhoid germs into the water supply, there would be an immediate and dramatic result. Suppose a biologist is presented with the task of producing a culture of yeast, which would, when placed in white bread dough, stain the bread brown. This man is up against the necessity of creating a yeast which not only behaves as yeast, but makes a dye as well. He has to deal with the practical aspect of the problem because, after he announces his success, there is the yeast test. Is the bread edible? And the brown bread test. Is the bread brown? Anyone could easily make the test, and everyone would know very quickly whether or not the biologist had succeeded or failed. Politics is called a science. There are natural laws about politics. They could be worked out if someone were to actually apply a scientific basis to political research. In the field of humanities, science has been thoroughly adrift. Unquestioned authoritarian principles have been followed. Any person who accepts knowledge without questioning it and evaluating it for himself is demonstrating himself to be in apathy toward that sphere of knowledge. Fundamentals. When a man tries to erect the plans of a lifetime or a profession on data which he himself has never evaluated, he cannot possibly succeed. Fundamentals are very, very important. But first of all, one must learn how to think in order to be absolutely sure of a fundamental. Thinking is not particularly hard to learn. It consists merely of comparing a particular datum with the physical universe as it is known and observed. When there is an authoritarian basis for your education, you are not truly educated. Authoritarianism is little more than a form of hypnotism. Learning is forced under threat of some form of punishment. A student is stuffed with data which has not been individually evaluated, just as a taxidermist would stuff a snake. Such a student will be well informed and well educated according to present-day standards, but unfortunately, he will not be very successful in his chosen profession. Indecision underlies an authoritarian statement. Do not allow your education to lie on the quicksand of indecision. Examine the subject of Scientology on a very critical basis, not with the attitude that when you were in school you learned that such and such was true, and since you learned that first, the first learning takes precedence. Do not make the mistake of criticizing something on the basis of whether or not it concurs with the opinions of someone else. The point which is pertinent is whether or not it concurs with your opinion. Does it agree with what you think? Take the time and effort of making a complete examination of your subject, introspectively and by observation. The hard way is to sit down and memorize 1,000,000 words, the method all too many educational systems employ in this age. Look at Scientology, study it, question it, and use it, and you will have discovered something for yourself. And in so doing, you might well discover a lot more. The techniques and the theories are highly workable, but they are not highly workable just because we say so. So, the only advice I can give you is to study Scientology for itself and use it exactly as stated. Then, form your own opinions. Study it with the purpose in mind of arriving at your own conclusions as to whether the tenets you have assimilated are correct and workable. Compare what you have learned with the known universe. Seek for the reasons behind a manifestation and postulate the manner and in which direction the manifestation will likely proceed. Do not allow the authority of any one person or school of thought to create a foregone conclusion within your sphere of knowledge. Only with these principles of education in mind can you become a truly educated individual. Man's search for his soul. For countless ages past, man has been engaged upon a search. All thinkers in all ages have contributed their opinion and considerations to it. No scientist, no philosopher, no leader has failed to comment upon it. Billions of men have died for one opinion or another on the subject of this search. And no civilization, mighty or poor, in ancient or in modern times, has endured without battle on its account. The human soul, to the civilized and barbaric alike, has been an endless source of interest, attention, hate, or adoration. To say that I have found the answer to all riddles of the soul would be inaccurate and presumptuous. To discount what I have come to know, and to fail to make that known after observing its benefits, would be a sin of omission against man. After decades of inquiry and thought, and after years of public activity wherein I observed the material at work and its results, I can announce that in the knowledge I have developed, there must lie the answers to that riddle, to that enigma, to that problem, the human soul. For under my hands and others, I have seen the best in man rehabilitated. For the time since I first made it clear, I have been, with some reluctance, out beyond any realm of the scientific known. I must face the fact that we have reached that merger point where science and religion meet, and we must now cease to pretend to deal with material goals alone. We cannot deal in the realm of the human soul and ignore the fact. Man has too long pursued this search for its happy culmination here to be muffled by vague and scientific terms. Religion, not science, has carried this search, this war, through the millennia. Science has all but swallowed man with an ideology which denies the soul, a symptom of the failure of science in that search. One cannot now play traitor to the men of God who sought these ages past to bring man from the darkness. We in Scientology belong in the ranks of the seekers after truth, not in the rear guard of the makers of the atom bomb. However, science, too, has had its role in these endeavors, and nuclear physics, whatever crime it does against man, may yet be redeemed by having been of aid in finding for man the soul of which science had all but deprived him. No Scientologist can easily close his eyes to the results he achieves today, or fail to see them superior to the materialistic technologies he earlier used. For we can know, with all else we know, that the human soul, freed, is the only effective therapeutic agent that we have. But our goals, no matter our miracles with bodies today, exceed physical health and better men. Scientology is the science of knowing how to know. It has taught us that a man is his own immortal soul, and it gives us little choice but to announce to a world, no matter how it receives it, that nuclear physics and religion have joined hands, and that we in Scientology perform those miracles for which man through all his search has hoped. The individual may hate God or despise priests. He cannot ignore, however, the evidence that he is his own soul. Thus, we have resolved our riddle and found the answer simple. On the mind and survival. On our efforts for immortality. The physical universe consists of 4 elements: matter, energy, space, and time. According to nuclear physics, matter is composed of energies such as electrons and protons, and the energy and the matter exist in space and time. All this is actually very simple. And even then, we need not go very far into it to understand that the universe in which we live is composed of simple things arranged and rearranged to make many forms and manifestations. The concrete sidewalk, the air, ice cream sodas, paychecks, cats, kings, and coal heavers are basically composed of matter, energy, space, and time. And where they are alive, they contain another ingredient: life. Life is an energy of a very special kind, obeying certain laws different from what we normally consider energy, such as electricity. But life is an energy, and it has some peculiar properties. Life is able to collect and organize matter and energy in space and time, and animate it. Life takes some matter and energy and makes an organism such as a monocell, a tree, a polar bear, or a man. Then this organism, still animated by the energy called life, further acts upon matter and energy in space and time, and further organizes and animates matter and energy into new objects and shapes. Life could be said to be engaged upon a conquest of the physical universe. The primary urge of life has been said to be survival. In order to accomplish survival, life has to continue and win in its conquest of the physical universe. When life or a life form ceases to continue that conquest, it ceases to survive and succumbs. Here we have a gigantic action: the energy of life versus matter, energy, space, and time. Life versus the physical universe. Here is an enormous struggle. The chaotic, disorganized physical universe, capable only of force, resisting the conquest of life, organizing and persistent, capable of reason. Life learns the laws of the physical universe, matter, energy, space, and time, and then turns those laws against the physical universe to further its conquest. Man has spent much time learning what he could of the physical universe, as in the sciences of physics and chemistry, but more important even, of the daily battle of life against the universe. Do not think that a monocell does not manifest a knowledge of life's working rules, for it does. What cunning it takes to organize some chemicals and sunlight into a living unit. The biologist stands in awe of the expertness of management of the smallest living cells. He gazes at these intricate and careful entities, these microscopic units of life forms, and even he cannot believe that it is all an accident. There is life, then, of vital energy, not quite like physical universe energy. And then there are life forms. The life form, or the organism, such as a living human body, consists of life plus physical universe matter, energy, space, and time. A dead body consists of physical universe matter, energy, space, and time, minus life energy. Life has been there, has organized, and has then withdrawn from the organism, an operation we know as the cycle of conception, birth, growth, decay, and death. Although there are answers as to where life goes when it withdraws and what it then does, we need not examine that now. The important thing to a living organism is the fact that it is seeking to survive in obedience to the whole effort of all life, and that in order to do so, it must succeed in its conquest of the physical universe. Stated simply, life must first accumulate enough matter and energy to make up an organism, such as the human body, and must then ally the organism with friendly and cooperative organisms, such as other people, and must continue to procure additional matter and energy for food, clothing, and shelter in order to support itself. Additionally, in order to survive, it must do two specific things, which, beyond the necessity of allies, food, clothing, and shelter, are basically important. Life must procure pleasure. Life must avoid pain. Life has an active thrust away from pain, which is non-survival, destructive, and which is death itself. Pain is a warning of non-survival or potential death. Life has an active thrust toward pleasure. Pleasure can be defined as the action toward obtaining or the procurement of survival. The ultimate pleasure is an infinity of survival or immortality, a goal unobtainable for the physical organism itself, but not its life, but toward which the organism strives. Happiness, then, could be defined as the overcoming of obstacles toward a desirable goal. Any desirable goal, if closely inspected, will be found to be a survival goal. Too much pain obstructs the organism toward survival. Too many obstructions between the organism and survival mean non-survival. Thus, one finds the mind engaged in computing or imagining ways and means to avoid pain and reach pleasure and putting the solutions into action. And this is all that the mind does. It perceives, poses, and resolves problems relating to the survival of the organism, the future generations, the group, life, and the physical universe, and puts the solutions into action. If it solves the majority of the problems presented, the organism thus achieves a high level of survival. If the organism's mind fails to resolve a majority of problems, then the organism fails. The mind, then, has a definite relationship to survival. And one means here the whole mind, not just the brain. The brain is a structure. The mind can be considered to be the whole being, mortal and immortal, the definite personality of the organism and all its attributes. Hence, if one's mind is working well, if it is resolving the problems it should resolve, and if it is putting those solutions into proper action, the survival of the organism is well assured. If the mind is not working well, the survival of the organism is thrown into question and doubt. One's mind, then, must be in excellent condition if he is to best guarantee the survival of himself, his family, future generations, his group, and life. The mind seeks to guarantee and direct survival actions. It seeks survival not only for the organism, self, but seeks it for the family, children, future generations, and all life. Thus, it can be selectively blunted. A mind can be blunted concerning the survival of self and yet be alive to the survival of future generations. It can be blunted concerning groups and yet be very alive to its responsibility for the organism, self. In order to function well, the mind must not be blunted in any direction. To function well, the mind must conceive itself able to handle the physical universe of matter, energy, space, and time within the necessities of the organism, the family, future generations, and groups, as well as life. The mind must be able to avoid pain for and discover pleasure for the self, future generations, the family, and the group, as well as life itself. As the mind fails to avoid pain and discover pleasure, so fails the organism, the family, future generations, the group, and life. The failure of one organism in a group to properly resolve survival problems is a failure in part for the whole group. Hence, do not send to find for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Life is an interdependent cooperative effort. Each and every living organism has a part to play in the survival of other organisms. When it comes to a thinking mind such as man's, the organism must be able to act independently for its own survival and the survival of others. In order to accomplish these survivals, however, a mind has to be able to realize solutions which are optimum not only for self, but for all other things concerned in its survival. Thus, the mind of one organism must reach agreements with the minds of other organisms in order that all may survive to the highest possible level. When a mind becomes dulled and blunted, it begins to compute its solutions poorly. It begins to get confused about its goals. It is not sure what it really means to do, and it will involve and inhibit the survival of other organisms. It may begin, for instance, to compute that it must survive as self, and that only self is important, and so neglect the survival of others. This is non-survival activity. It is highly aberrated. A mind which begins to survive only for self and begins to diminish and control with force other organisms around is already better than halfway toward its own death. It is a mind which is less than half alive. It has less than half its actual potential. Its perception of the physical universe is poor. It does not realize that it is dependent for survival upon cooperation with others. It has lost its survival mission. This mind is already outward bound toward death, has passed its peak, and will actually take personal actions which lead to its own death. Life, the large overall life, has a use for organism death. When an organism can no longer continue well, the plan of life is to kill it and invest anew in a new organism. Death is life's operation of disposing of an outmoded and unwanted organism so that new organisms can be born and can flourish. Life itself does not die. Only the physical organism dies. Not even a personality apparently dies. Death, then, in truth, is a limited concept of the death of the physical part of the organism. Life and the personality apparently go on. The physical part of the organism ceases to function. And that is death. When an organism reaches a point where it is only half conscious, where it is only perceiving half as well as it should, where it is functioning only half as well as it should, death begins. The organism thereafter will take actions to hasten death. It does this unconsciously. But in its aberrated state, such a mind will also bring death to other organisms. Thus, a half-conscious organism is a menace to others. Here is the accident-prone, the fascist, the person who seeks to dominate, the selfish and self-seeking person. Here is an organism outward bound. When an organism reaches a point where it is only a third alive, a third conscious, it is perceiving only a third of what it might. Life even further hastens the death of this organism and those around it. Here is the suicide. Here is the person who is continually ill, who refuses to eat. Organisms which are outward bound toward death sometimes require years and years to die. For the organism experiences resurgences and still has some small desire to go on living. And other organisms help it to live. It is carried along by the tide of life even though its individual direction is toward death. Death for others, and death for self, and death for the physical universe around it. Society, the bulk of which is bent upon survival, fails or refuses to recognize death or the urge of organisms toward it. Society passes laws against murder and suicide. Society provides hospitals. Society carries such people upon its back. And society will not hear of euthanasia or mercy-killing. Organisms which have passed the halfway point will take extraordinary measures and means to bring about death for others and for things and for self. Here we have the Hitlers, the criminals, the destructively neurotic. Give a person who has passed this point a car to drive, and the car may become involved in an accident. Give him money, and the money will go to purchase non-survival things. But we must not emphasize the dramatic and forget the important, like the newspapers do. The action and urge toward death becomes noticeable only when it is very dramatic. It is most dangerous, however, in its undramatic forms. A person who has passed the halfway point brings death to things and people on a small scale at all times. A house left dirty, appointments not kept, clothing not cared for, vicious gossip, carping criticisms of others for their own good. These are all in turbulences which bring failure, and too many failures bring death. And it should not be supposed that by halfway point one means halfway through life. It means half conscious, half alive, half or less perceiving and thinking. A child may be suppressed to this level by his parents in school. And indeed, children quite ordinarily drop below the halfway point. So defeated do they become in their environment and in their contest with life. Age is no criterion, but physical health is. The surest manifestation that someone has passed the halfway point is his physical condition. The chronically ill have passed it. If one is to have a secure society, then, if one is to rid a society of its death factors, one must have some means of either destroying the people who bring death to it, the Hitlers, the insane, the criminals, Or he must have some means of salvaging these people and bringing them back into a state of full consciousness. Full consciousness would mean full recognition of one's responsibilities, his relationship with others, his care of himself and of society. How can such a thing be achieved? If you could achieve it, you could raise a social order to hitherto unattainable heights. You could empty the prisons and insane asylums. You could make a world too sane for war. And people could be made well who have never had the means of it before. And people could be happy who have never truly known what happiness was. You could raise the goodwill and efficiency of all men and all social orders if you could restore the vitality of these people. In order to know how it can be restored, one has to know how the consciousness, the vitality, and the will to live become reduced. On raising our level of consciousness. An organism is suppressed toward death by accumulated pain. Pain in one great sweeping shock brings about immediate death. Pain in small doses over a lifetime gradually suppresses the organism toward death. What is pain? Pain is the warning of loss. It is an automatic alarm system built into life organisms which informs the organism that some part of it or all of it is under stress and that the organism had better take action or die. The signal of pain means that the organism is in the proximity of a destructive force or object. To ignore pain is to die. Pain is the whip which sends the organism away from hot stoves, sub-zero weather. Pain is the threat of non-survival, the punishment for errors in trying to survive. And pain is always loss. A burned finger means that the body has lost the cells on the surface of that finger. They are dead. A blow on the head means the death of scalp and other cells in the area. The whole organism is thus warned of the proximity of a death source and so attempts to get away from it. The loss of a loved one is also a loss of survival. The loss of a possession is also loss of survival potential. One then confuses physical pain and the loss of survival organisms or objects, and so there is such a thing as mental pain. But life, in its whole contest with the physical universe, has no patience with failure. An organism so foolhardy as to let itself be struck too hard and so depressed into unconsciousness stays in the vicinity of the pain-dealing object. It is considered to be non-survival if it fails so markedly to survive. Unconsciousness experienced as a result of a blow or an illness is a quick picture of what happens over a lifespan. Is there any difference except time between these two things? A blow resulting in unconsciousness, which results in death. The accumulated blows over a lifespan resulting in a gradual lessening of consciousness resulting in eventual death. One is slower than the other. One of the basic discoveries was that unconsciousness and all the pain attendant upon it were stored in a part of the mind, and that this pain and unconsciousness accumulated until they caused the organism to begin to die. Another discovery was that this pain could be nullified or erased with a return to full consciousness and a rehabilitation toward survival. In other words, it became possible to cancel out the accumulated unconsciousness and pain of the years and restore the health and vitality of an organism. Accumulated physical pain and loss bring about a reduction of consciousness, a reduction of physical health, and a reduction of the will to live to a point where the organism actively, if often slyly, seeks death. Erase or nullify the physical pain, the losses of a lifetime, and vitality returns. The vitality of living, of seeking higher levels of survival, is life itself. The human body was found to be extremely capable of repairing itself when the stored memories of pain were canceled. Further, it was discovered that so long as the stored pain remained, the doctoring of what are called psychosomatic ills, such as arthritis, rheumatism, dermatitis, and thousands of others could not result in anything permanent. Psychotherapy, not knowing about pain storage and its effects, discovered long ago that one could rid a patient of one illness only to have another pop up. And psychotherapy became a defeatist school because it could do nothing permanent for the aberrated or the ill, even when it could do a little something to relieve it. Hence, all efforts to make men vital and well became suspect because the reason they were inefficient and ill had not been discovered and proven. With these new discoveries, it became possible to eradicate aberration and illness, because it became possible to nullify or eradicate the pain from the pain storage banks of the body without applying further pain, as in surgery. Consciousness, then, depends upon the absence or the nullification or eradication of memories of physical pain, for unconsciousness is a part of that pain, one of its symptoms. Arthritis of the knee, for instance, is the accumulation of all knee injuries in the past. The body confuses time and environment with the time and environment where the knee was actually injured and so keeps the pain there. The fluids of the body avoid the pain area, hence a deposit which is called arthritis. The proof of this is that when the knee injuries of the past are located and discharged, the arthritis ceases. No other injury takes its place, and the person is finished with arthritis of the knee. And this happens 10 cases out of 10, except in those cases where age and physical deterioration are so well advanced toward death that the point of no return is past. Take a bad heart. The person has pain in his heart. He can take medicine or voodoo or another diet and still have a bad heart. Find and eradicate or nullify an actual physical injury to the heart, and the heart ceases to hurt and gets well. Nothing is easier to prove than these tenets. A good auditor, Scientology practitioner, can take a broken-down, sorrow-drenched lady of 38 and knock out her past periods of physical and mental pain, and have on his hands somebody who appears to be 25, and a bright, cheerful 25 at that. Sure, it's incredible, but so is an A-bomb, a few pennyweights of plutonium which can blow a city off the chart. Once you know the basic tenets of life and how it acts as an energy, life can be put back into the ill, the devitalized, the would-be suicide. And more important than treating the very ill, mentally or physically, one can interrupt the downward spiral in a man who is still alert and well so that he will not thereafter become so ill. And one can take the so-called normal person and send his state of being up to levels of brilliance and success not possible before. Restore an individual's full consciousness, and you restore his full life potential. And it can now be done. On the fundamentals of life and living. The 8 dynamics. As one looks out across the confusion which is life or existence to most people, one can discover 8 main divisions. There could be said to be 8 urges, drives, impulses in life. These we call dynamics. These are motives or motivations. We call them the 8 dynamics. There is no thought or statement here that any one of these 8 dynamics is more important than the others. While they are categories, divisions of the broad game of life, they are not necessarily equal to each other. It will be found amongst individuals that each person stresses one of the dynamics more than the others, or may stress a combination of dynamics as more important than other combinations. The purpose in setting forth this division is to increase an understanding of life by placing it in compartments. Having subdivided existence in this fashion, each compartment can be inspected as itself and by itself in its relationship to the other compartments of life. In working a puzzle, it is necessary to first take pieces of similar color or character and place them in groups. In studying a subject, it is necessary to proceed in an orderly fashion. To promote this orderliness, it is necessary to assume, for our purposes, these 8 arbitrary compartments of life. The first dynamic is the urge toward existence as oneself. Here we have individuality expressed fully. This can be called the self dynamic. The second dynamic is the urge toward existence as a sexual activity. This dynamic actually has two divisions. Second dynamic A is the sexual act itself, and the second dynamic B is the family unit, including the rearing of children. This can be called the sex dynamic. The third dynamic is the urge toward existence in groups of individuals. Any group or part of an entire class could be considered to be a part of the third dynamic. The school, the society, the town, the nation are each part of the third dynamic, and each one is a third dynamic. This can be called the group dynamic. The fourth dynamic is the urge toward existence as or of mankind. Whereas one race would be considered a third dynamic, all the races would be considered the fourth dynamic. This can be called the mankind dynamic. The fifth dynamic is the urge toward existence of the animal kingdom. This includes all living things, whether vegetable or animal, the fish in the sea, the beasts of the field, or of the forest, grass, trees, flowers, or anything directly and intimately motivated by life. This can be called the animal dynamic. The sixth dynamic is the urge toward existence as the physical universe. The physical universe is composed of matter, energy, space, and time. In Scientology, we take the first letter of each of these words and coin a word, MEST. This can be called the universe dynamic. The seventh dynamic is the urge toward existence as or of spirits. Anything spiritual, with or without identity, would come under the heading of the seventh dynamic. This can be called the spiritual dynamic. The eighth dynamic is the urge toward existence as infinity. This is also identified as the supreme being. This is called the eighth dynamic because the symbol of infinity stood upright makes the numeral 8. This can be called the infinity or God dynamic. Scientologists usually call these by number. A further manifestation of these dynamics is that they could best be represented as a series of concentric circles, wherein the first dynamic would be the center and each new dynamic would be successively a circle outside it. The basic characteristic of the individual includes his ability to so expand into the other dynamics. As an example of use of these dynamics, one discovers that a baby at birth is not perceptive beyond the first dynamic. But as the child grows and interests extend, the child can be seen to embrace other dynamics. As a further example of use, a person who is incapable of operating on the third dynamic is incapable at once of being a part of a team, and so might be said to be incapable of a social existence. As a further comment upon the 8 dynamics, no one of these dynamics from 1 to 7 is more important than any other one of them in terms of orienting the individual. The abilities and shortcomings of individuals can be understood by viewing their participation in the various dynamics. The affinity, reality, and communication triangle. There is a triangle of considerable importance in Scientology, and an ability to use it gives a much greater understanding of life. The ARC triangle is the keystone of living associations. This triangle is the common denominator to all of life's activities. The first corner of the triangle is called affinity. The basic definition of affinity is the consideration of distance, whether good or bad. The most basic function of complete affinity would be the ability to occupy the same space as something else. The word affinity is here used to mean love, liking, or any other emotional attitude. Affinity is conceived in Scientology to be something of many facets. Affinity is a variable quality. Affinity is here used as a word with the context degree of liking. Under affinity, we have the various emotional tones ranged from the highest to the lowest, and these are in part serenity, the highest level, enthusiasm, conservatism, as we proceed downward towards the baser affinities, boredom, antagonism, anger, covert hostility, fear, grief, apathy. This in Scientology is called the tone scale. Below apathy, affinity proceeds into solidities such as matter. Affinity is conceived to be comprised first of thought, then of emotion, which contains energy particles, and then as a solid. The second corner of the triangle is reality. Reality could be defined as that which appears to be. Reality is fundamentally agreement. What we agree to be real is real. The third corner of the triangle is communication. In understanding the composition of human relations in this universe, communication is more important than the other two corners of the triangle. Communication is the solvent for all things. It dissolves all things. The interrelationship of the triangle becomes apparent at once when one asks, have you ever tried to talk to an angry man? Without a high degree of liking and without some basis of agreement, there is no communication. Without communication and some basis of emotional response, there can be no reality. Without some basis for agreement and communication, there can be no affinity. Thus, we call these three things a triangle. Unless we have two corners of a triangle, there cannot be a third corner. Desiring any corner of the triangle, one must include the other two. The triangle is conceived to be very spacious at the level of serenity and completely condensed at the level of matter. Thus, to represent a scale for use, one would draw a large triangle with the high part of the scale and succeedingly smaller triangles down to a dot at the bottom of the scale. Affinity, reality, and communication are the basis of the Scientology tone scale, which gives a prediction of human behavior. As has already been noted, the triangle is not an equilateral, all sides the same, triangle. Affinity and reality are very much less important than communication. It might be said that the triangle begins with communication, which brings into existence affinity and reality. ARC are understanding. If you would continue a strong and able communication with someone, there must be some basis for agreement. There must be some liking for the person, and then communication can exist. We can see then that simple talking and writing randomly without knowledge of this would not necessarily be communication. Communication is essentially something which is sent and which is received. The intention to send and the intention to receive must both be present in some degree before an actual communication can take place. Therefore, one could have conditions which appear to be communications which were not. Original with Scientology, as are all these concepts, the ARC triangle, understood, is an extremely useful tool or weapon in human relationships. For instance, amongst the ARC triangle laws, a communication to be received must approximate the affinity level of the person to whom it is directed. As people descend the tone scale, they become more and more difficult to communicate with, and things with which they will agree become more and more solid. Thus, we have friendly discourses high on the scale and war at the bottom. Where the affinity level is hate, the agreement is solid matter, and the communication, bullets. The reason why. Life can best be understood by likening it to a game. Since we are exterior to a great number of games, we can regard them with a detached eye. If we were exterior to life, instead of being involved and immersed in the living of it, it would look to us much like games look to us from our present vantage point. Despite the amount of suffering, pain, misery, sorrow, and travail which can exist in life, The reason for existence is the same reason as one has to play a game: interest, contest, activity, and possession. The truth of this assertion is established by an observation of the elements of games and then applying these elements to life itself. When we do this, we find nothing left wanting in the panorama of life. By game, we mean contest of person against person or team against team. When we say games, we mean such games as baseball, polo, chess, or any other such pastime. It may at one time have struck you peculiar that men would risk bodily injury in the field of play just for the sake of amusement. So it might strike you as peculiar that people would go on living or would enter into the game of life at the risk of all the sorrow, travail, and pain just to have something to do. Evidently, there is no greater curse than total idleness. Of course, there is that condition where a person continues to play a game in which he is no longer interested. If you will but look about the room and check off items in which you are not interested, you will discover something remarkable. In a short time, you will find that there is nothing in the room in which you are not interested. You are interested in everything. However, disinterest itself is one of the mechanisms of play. In order to hide something, it is only necessary to make everyone disinterested in the place where the item is hidden. Disinterest is not an immediate result of interest which has worn out. Disinterest is a commodity in itself. It is palpable. It exists. By studying the elements of games, we find ourselves in possession of the elements of life. Life is a game. A game consists of freedom, barriers, and purposes. This is a scientific fact, not merely an observation. Freedom exists amongst barriers. A totality of barriers and a totality of freedom alike are no-game conditions. Each is similarly cruel. Each is similarly purposeless. Great revolutionary movements fail. They promise unlimited freedom. That is the road to failure. Only stupid visionaries chant of endless freedom. Only the afraid and ignorant speak of and insist upon unlimited barriers. When the relation between freedom and barriers becomes too unbalanced, an unhappiness results. Freedom from is all right, only so long as there is a place to be free to. An endless desire for freedom from is a perfect trap, a fear of all things. Barriers are composed of inhibiting, limiting ideas, space, energy, masses, and time. Freedom in its entirety would be a total absence of these things. But it would also be a freedom without thought or action, an unhappy condition of total nothingness. Fixed on too many barriers, man yearns to be free. But launched into total freedom, he is purposeless and miserable. There is freedom amongst barriers. If the barriers are known and the freedoms are known, there can be life, living, happiness, a game. The restrictions of a government or a job give an employee his freedom. Without known restrictions, an employee is a slave doomed to the fears of uncertainty in all his actions. Executives in business and government can fail in three ways and thus bring about a chaos in their department. They can 1. Seem to give endless freedom. 2. Seem to give endless barriers. 3. Make neither freedom nor barriers certain. Executive competence, therefore, consists of imposing and enforcing an adequate balance between their people's freedom and the unit's barriers, and in being precise and consistent about those freedoms and barriers. Such an executive, adding only in himself initiative and purpose, can have a department with initiative and purpose. An employee buying and/or insisting upon freedom only will become a slave. Knowing the above facts, he must insist upon a workable balance between freedom and barriers. An examination of the dynamics will demonstrate the possibility of a combination of teams. Two group dynamics can engage one another as teams. The self dynamic can ally itself with the animal dynamic against, let us say, the universe dynamic, and so have a game. In other words, the dynamics are an outline of possible teams and interplays. As everyone is engaged in several games, an examination of the dynamics will plot and clarify for him the various teams he is playing upon and those he is playing against. If an individual can discover that he is only playing on the self dynamic and that he belongs to no other team, it is certain that this individual will lose. For he has before him 7 remaining dynamics, and the self dynamic is seldom capable of besting, by itself, all the remaining dynamics. In Scientology, we call this condition the only one. Here is self-determinism in the guise of selfish determinism. And here is an individual who will most certainly be overwhelmed. To enjoy life, one must be willing to be some part of life. There is the principle in Scientology called pan-determinism. This could be loosely defined as determining the activities of 2 or more sides in a game simultaneously. For instance, a person playing chess is being self-determined and is playing chess against an opponent. A person who is pan-determined on the subject of chess could play both sides of the board. A being is pan-determined about any game to which he is senior. He is self-determined only in a game to which he is junior. For instance, a general of an army is pan-determined concerning an argument between 2 privates or even 2 companies of his command. He is pan-determined in this case, but when he confronts another army led by another general, he becomes self-determined. The game in this wise could be said to be larger than himself. The game becomes even larger than this when the general seeks to play the parts of all the political heads which should be above him. This is the main reason why dictatorship doesn't work. It is all but impossible for one man to be pan-determined about the entire system of games which comprise a nation. He starts taking sides and then, to that degree, becomes much less than the government which he is seeking to run. It has been stylish in past ages to insist only upon freedom. The French Revolution furnishes an excellent example for this. In the late part of the 18th century, the nobles of France became so self-determined against the remainder of the country and were so incapable of taking the parts of the populace that the nobles were destroyed. Immediately, the populace itself sought to take over the government. And being untrained and being intensely antipathetic to any and all restraints, their war cry became freedom. They had no further restrictions or barriers. The rules of government were thrown aside. Theft and brigandage took the place of economics. The populace, therefore, found itself in a deeper trap and discovered itself to be involved with a dictatorship which was far more restrictive than anything they had experienced before the revolution. Although man continually uses freedom for his war cry, he only succeeds in establishing further entrapment for himself. The reason for this is a very simple one. A game consists of freedom and barriers and purposes. When man drops the idea of restrictions or barriers, he loses at once control over barriers. He becomes self-determined about barriers and not pan-determined. Thus, he cannot control the barriers. The barriers left uncontrolled trap him then and there. The dwindling spiral comes about directly when man shuns barriers. If he considers all restrictions and barriers his enemies, he is of course refusing to control them in any way, and thus he starts his own dwindling spiral. A race which is educated to think in terms of freedom only is very easily entrapped. No one in the nation will take responsibility for restrictions. Therefore, restrictions apparently become less and less. Actually, they become more and more. As these restrictions lessen, so lessens the freedom of the individual. One cannot be free from a wall unless there is a wall. Lacking any restrictions, life becomes purposeless, random, chaotic. A good manager must be capable of taking responsibility for restrictions. in that freedom to exist must have barriers. A failure to take initiative on the subject of restrictions or barriers causes them to arise all by themselves and exist without consent or direction. There are various states of mind which bring about happiness. That state of mind which insists only upon freedom can bring about nothing but unhappiness. It would be better to develop a thought pattern which looked for new ways to be entrapped and things to be trapped in, than to suffer the eventual total entrapment of dwelling upon freedom only. A man who is willing to accept restrictions and barriers and is not afraid of them is free. A man who does nothing but fight restrictions and barriers will usually be trapped. The way to have endless war is abandon all war. As it can be seen in any game, purposes become counterposed. There is a matter of purpose, counterpurpose in almost any game played in a field with two teams. One team has the idea of reaching the goal of the other, and the other has the idea of reaching the goal of the first. Their purposes are at war, and this warring of purposes makes a game. The war of purposes gives us what we call problems. A problem has the anatomy of purposes. A problem consists of two or more purposes opposed. It does not matter what problem you face or have faced. The basic anatomy of that problem is purpose, counterpurpose. In actual testing, in Scientology, it has been discovered that a person begins to suffer from problems when he does not have enough of them. There is the old maxim that if you want a thing done, give it to a busy man to do. Similarly, if you want a happy associate, make sure that he is a man who can have lots of problems. From this, we get the oddity of a high incidence of neurosis in the families of the rich. These people have very little to do and have very few problems. The basic problems of food, clothing, and shelter are already solved for them. We would suppose then, if it were true that an individual's happiness depended only upon his freedom, these people would be happy. However, they are not happy. What brings about their unhappiness? It is the lack of problems. Although successful processing in Scientology would depend upon taking all three elements of games into consideration, and indeed that is the secret of bettering people, taking freedom, barriers, and purposes into consideration and balancing them, it is true that you could make a man well simply by sitting down with him and asking him to invent problems one after the other. The invention of synthetic problems would be found to free his mind and make him more able. Of course, there is another factor involved in this. In that it is he who is inventing the problems, he is therefore becoming pan-determined about problems rather than being in one place with all problems opposed to him. One who is plotting continually how to get out of things will become miserable. One who is plotting how to get into things has a much better chance of becoming happy. There is, of course, the matter of being forced to play games in which one has no interest. A war into which one is drafted is an excellent example of this. One is not interested in the purposes of the war, and yet one finds himself fighting it. Thus, there must be an additional element. And this element is the power of choice. One could say then that life is a game, and that the ability to play a game consists of tolerance for freedom and barriers, and an insight into purposes with the power of choice over participation. These four elements, freedom, barriers, purposes, and power of choice, are the guiding elements of life. This then is the broad picture of life, and in bringing life into focus and in making it less confusing, these elements are used in its understanding. On work and success. Handling the confusions of the workaday world. One might be led to believe there was something confusing about navigating one's career in the world of work. And confusion there is to one who is not equipped with guides and maps. Basically, it all seemed very simple, this thing called work, getting a job. One was educated into some skill, and one read an ad or was sent by a friend and was interviewed for a job. And one got it, and then reported every day and did the things assigned and, as time went on, hoped for a raise in pay. And time, going even further on, brought one to hope for a pension or a governmental regime that would pay old age benefits, and that was the simple pattern of it. But times change, and simple patterns have a habit of being deranged. The various incidents and accidents of fate entered into the picture. Completely aside from personal factors, larger views alter things. The government in sweeping economy fails to grant adequate pension. The business for which one works is shattered by a time of depression, or one's health fails inexplicably and one is left on charity. The worker in his workaday world is no towering giant amongst his many foes. The tinsel path sketched so happily by rabble-rousers, the great affection held for the worker by this or that ideology or political figure, do not reflect fact. A man working at a job is faced by difficulties large enough to him, no matter how small they might seem to a successful industrialist. A few % rise in taxes may mean that he thereafter goes without simple pleasures. An entrance upon bad times for the business may result in lessened pay, and there may go any and all luxuries and even some necessities, or the job. The effect of international currents, governments, business trends, and markets, all usually beyond his concern, the worker is perfectly entitled to believe that his fate is not quite entirely predictable. Indeed, he might even be entitled to be confused. A man can starve to death in a few days. Few workers have many days of margin in their pockets if the currents change. Thus, many things, which would be no vast problem to the very secure, are watched as menaces by the worker. And these things can become so many that all life seems too confused to be borne, and one sinks into an apathy of day-to-day grind, without much hope, trusting that the next storm by luck will pass over him. As one looks at the many factors which might derange his life and undermine his security, the impression of confusion seems well-founded. And it can be said with truth that all difficulties are fundamentally confusions. Given enough menace, enough unknown, a man ducks his head and tries to swing through it blindly. He has been overcome by confusions. Enough unsolved problems add up to a huge confusion. Every now and then, on his job, enough conflicting orders bring the worker into a state of confusion. A modern plant can be so poorly managed that the entire thing appears to be a vast confusion to which no answer is possible. Luck is the usual answer one resorts to in a confusion. If the forces about one seem too great, one can always rely on his luck. By luck, we mean destiny not personally guided. When one turns loose an automobile wheel and hopes the car will stay on the road, by luck, he is often disappointed. And so it is in life. Those things left to chance become less likely to work themselves out. One has seen a friend shutting his eyes to the bill collectors and gritting his teeth while he hopes that he will win at the races and solve all his problems. One has known people who handled their lives this way for years. Indeed, one of Dickens' great characters had the entire philosophy of waiting for something to turn up. But luck, while we grant that it is a potent element, is only necessary amid a strong current of confusing factors. If one has to have luck to see him through, then it follows that one isn't any longer at his own automobile wheel, and it follows, too, that one is dealing with a confusion. A confusion can be defined as any set of factors or circumstances which do not seem to have any immediate solution. More broadly, a confusion in this universe is random motion. If you were to stand in heavy traffic, you would be likely to feel confused by all the motion whizzing around you. If you were to stand in a heavy storm with leaves and papers flying by, you would be likely to feel confused. Is it possible to actually understand a confusion? Is there any such thing as an anatomy of confusion? Yes, there is. If, as a switchboard operator, you had 10 calls hitting your board at once, you might feel confused. But is there any answer to the situation? If, as a shop foreman, you have 3 emergencies and an accident all at the same time, you might feel confused. But is there any answer to that? A confusion is only a confusion so long as all particles are in motion. A confusion is only a confusion so long as no factor is clearly defined or understood. Confusion is the basic cause of stupidity. To the stupid, all things except the very simple ones are confused. Thus, if one knew the anatomy of confusion, no matter how bright one might be, he would be brighter. If you have ever had to teach some young aspirant who is not too bright, you will understand this well. You attempt to explain how such and so works. You go over it and over it and over it. And then you turn him loose and he promptly makes a complete botch of it. He didn't understand. He didn't grasp it. You can simplify your understanding of his misunderstanding by saying, very rightly, he was confused. 99% of all education fails, when it fails, on the grounds that the student was confused. And not only in the realm of the job, but in life itself. When failure approaches, it is born, one way or another, from confusion. To learn of machinery or to live life, one has to be able either to stand up to confusion or to take it apart. We have, in Scientology, a certain doctrine about confusion. It is called the doctrine of the stable datum. If you saw a great many pieces of paper whirling about a room, they would look confused until you picked out one piece of paper to be the piece of paper by which everything else was in motion. In other words, a confusing motion can be understood by conceiving one thing to be motionless. In a stream of traffic, all would be confusion unless you were to conceive one car to be motionless in relation to the other cars, and so to see others in relation to the one. The switchboard operator, receiving 10 calls at once, solves the confusion by labeling, correctly or incorrectly, one call as the first call to receive her attention. The confusion of 10 calls all at once becomes less confusing the moment she singles out one call to be answered. The shop foreman, confronted by 3 emergencies and an accident, needs only to elect his first target of attention to start the cycle of bringing about order again. Until one selects one datum, one factor, one particular in a confusion of particles, the confusion continues. The one thing selected and used becomes the stable datum for the remainder. Any body of knowledge, more particularly and exactly, is built from one datum. That is, its stable datum. Invalidate it, and the entire body of knowledge falls apart. A stable datum does not have to be the correct one. It is simply the one that keeps things from being in a confusion and on which others are aligned. Now, in teaching a young aspirant to use a machine, he failed to grasp your directions, if he did, because he lacked a stable datum. One fact had to be brought home to him first. Grasping that, he could grasp others. One is stupid then, or confused in any confusing situation, until he has fully grasped one fact or one item. Confusions, no matter how big and formidable they may seem, are composed of data or factors or particles. They have pieces. Grasp one piece or locate it thoroughly. Then see how the others function in relation to it, and you have steadied the confusion. And relating other things to what you have grasped, you will soon have mastered the confusion in its entirety. In teaching a boy to run a machine, don't throw a torrent of data at him and then point out his errors. That's confusion to him. That makes him respond stupidly. Find some entrance point to his confusion, one datum. Tell him, this is a machine. It may be that all the directions were flung at someone who had no real certainty, no real order in existence. This is a machine, you say. Then make him sure of it. Make him feel it, fiddle with it, push at it. This is a machine, tell him. And you'd be surprised how long it may take. But you'd be surprised as well how his certainty increases. Out of all the complexities he must learn to operate it, he must know one datum first. It is not even important which datum he first learns well. Beyond that, it is better to teach him a simple, basic datum. You can show him what it does. You can explain to him the final product. You can tell him why he has been selected to run this machine. But you must make one basic datum clear to him, or else he will be lost in confusion. Confusion is uncertainty. Confusion is stupidity. Confusion is insecurity. When you think of uncertainty, stupidity, and insecurity, think of confusion, and you'll have it down pat. What then is certainty? Lack of confusion. What then is intelligence? Ability to handle confusion. What then is security? The ability to go through or around or to bring order to confusion. Certainty, intelligence, and security are lack of or ability to handle confusion. How does luck fit into confusion? Luck is the hope that some uncontrolled chance will get one through. Counting on luck is an abandonment of control. That's apathy. There is good control and bad control. The difference between them is certainty and uncertainty. Good control is certain, positive, predictable. Bad control is uncertain, variable, and unpredictable. With good control, one can be certain. With bad control, one is never certain. A foreman who makes a rule effective today but not tomorrow, who makes George obey but not James, is exercising bad control. In that foreman's wake will come uncertainty and insecurity, no matter what his personal attributes may be. Because there can be so much uncertain, stupid control, some of us begin to believe that all control is bad, but this is very far from true. Control is necessary if one would bring any order into confusions. One must be able to control things, his body, his thoughts, at least to some degree, to do anything whatever. A confusion could be called an uncontrolled randomness. Only those who can exert some control over that randomness can handle confusions. Those who cannot exert control actually breed confusions. The difference between good and bad control then becomes more obvious. The difference between good and bad here is degree. A thorough, positive control can be predicted by others. Therefore, it is good control. A non-positive, sloppy control cannot be predicted. Therefore, it is a bad control. Intention also has something to do with control. Control can be used for constructive purposes or destructive purposes. But you will discover that when destructive purposes are intended, bad control is used. Thus, there is a great deal to this entire subject of confusion. You may find it rather odd for confusion itself to be used here as a target, but you will find that it is an excellent common denominator to all that we consider evil in life. And if one can become master of confusions, his attention is freed for constructive activity. So long as one is being confused by confusions, all he can think about are destructive things. What he wants to do most is to destroy the confusion. So let us then learn first how to destroy confusions. And this, we find, is a rather simple thing. When all particles seem to be in motion, halt one and see how the others move according to it, and then you will find less confusion present. With one adopted as a stable datum, others can be made to fall in line. Thus, an emergency, a machine, a job, or life itself can be viewed and understood, and one can be free. Let us take a glance at how this works. One can handle this entire problem, as people most often do, by entering into the problem the single datum, I can get and hold a job. By clutching to this as a single belief, the confusions and insecurities of life become less effective, less confusing. But suppose one has done this. Without further investigating the problem, one, when young, gritted his teeth and shut his eyes and said, I can get and hold a job come what may. Therefore, I am not going to worry about the economics of existence anymore. Well, that was fine. Later on, without warning, one got fired. One was out of work for 10 weeks. He felt then, even when he did get a new job, less secure, less confident. And let us say that some accident occurred and one was out of a job again. When once more unemployed, he was once more even less confident, less secure. Why? Let us take a look at the opposite side of this doctrine of the stable datum. If we do, we learn that confusions are held ineffective by stable data, and that when the stable datum is shaken, the confusion comes into being again. Let us envision a confusion as stopped. It is still scattered, but it is stopped. What stopped it? The adoption of a stable datum. Let us say that one was bothered badly in the home by a mother-in-law. One day, after a quarrel, one stalked out and by inspiration said to himself, "All mothers-in-law are evil." That was a decision. That, rightly or wrongly, was a stable datum adopted in a confusion. At once one felt better. He could deal with or live with the problem now. He knew that all mothers-in-law were evil. It wasn't true, but it was a stable datum. Then, one day, when he was in trouble, his mother-in-law stepped forward, true blue, and paid not only the rent, but the other debt too. At once, he felt very confused. This act of kindness should not have been a thing to bring in confusion. After all, hadn't she solved the problem? Then why does one feel upset about it? Because the stable datum has been shaken. The entire confusion of the past problem came into action again by reason of the demonstrated falsity of the stable datum. To make anyone confused, all you have to do is locate their stable data and invalidate them. By criticism or proof, it is only necessary to shake these few stable data to get all a person's confusions back into action. You see, stable data do not have to be true. They are simply adopted. When adopted, then one looks at other data in relation to them. Thus, the adoption of any stable datum will tend to nullify the confusion addressed. But if that stable datum is shaken, invalidated, disproven, then one is left again with the confusion. Of course, all one has to do is adopt a new stable datum or put the old stable datum back in place. But he'd have to know Scientology in order to accomplish this smoothly. Let us say one has no fears of national economy because of a heroic political figure who is trying his best. That man is the stable datum to all one's confusions about national economy. Thus, one isn't worried. But one day, circumstances or his political enemies shake him as a datum. They prove he was really dishonest. One then becomes worried all over again about national economy. Maybe you adopted some philosophy because the speaker seemed such a pleasant chap. Then some person carefully proves to you that the speaker was actually a thief, or worse. One adopted the philosophy because one needed some peace from his thoughts. Invalidating the speaker would then at once bring back the confusion one faced originally. All right, we looked at the confusion of the workaday world when we were young, and we held it all back by stating grimly, "I can get and keep a job." That was the stable datum. We did get a job, but we got fired. The confusion of the workaday world then became very confusing. If we have only the one stable datum, "I can get and keep a job," as our total answer to all the various problems of work, then assuredly one is going to spend some confusing periods in his working life. A far, far better stable datum would be, "I understand about life and jobs, therefore I can get, hold, and improve them." The man who succeeds. The conditions of success are few and easily stated. Jobs are not held consistently and in actuality by flukes of fate or fortune. Those who depend upon luck generally experience bad luck. The ability to hold a job depends in the main upon ability. One must be able to control his work and must be able to be controlled in doing his work. One must be able, as well, to leave certain areas uncontrolled. One's intelligence is directly related to his ability. There is no such thing as being too smart, but there is such a thing as being too stupid. But one may be both able and intelligent without succeeding. A vital part of success is the ability to handle and control not only one's tools of the trade, but the people with whom one is surrounded. In order to do this, one must be capable of a very high level of affinity. He must be able to tolerate massive realities, and he must, as well, be able to give and receive communication. The ingredients of success are then, first, an ability to confront work with joy and not horror, a wish to do work for its own sake, not because one has to have a paycheck. One must be able to work without driving oneself or experiencing deep depths of exhaustion. If one experiences these things, there is something wrong with him. There is some element in his environment that he should be controlling that he isn't controlling, or his accumulated injuries are such as to make him shy away from all people and masses with whom he should be in intimate contact. The ingredients of successful work are training and experience in the subject being addressed, good general intelligence and ability, a capability of high affinity, a tolerance of reality, and the ability to communicate and receive ideas. Given these things, there is left only a slim chance of failure. Given these things, a man can ignore all of the accidents of birth, marriage, or fortune. For birth, marriage, and fortune are not capable of placing these necessary ingredients in one's hands. One could have all the money in the world and yet be unable to perform an hour's honest labor. Such a man would be a miserably unhappy one. The person who studiously avoids work usually works far longer and far harder than the man who pleasantly confronts it and does it. Men who cannot work are not happy men. Work is the stable datum of this society. Without something to do, there is nothing for which to live. A man who cannot work is as good as dead and usually prefers death and works to achieve it. The mysteries of life are not today, with Scientology, very mysterious. Mystery is not a needful ingredient. Only the very aberrated man desires to have vast secrets held away from him. Scientology has slashed through many of the complexities which have been erected for men and has bared the core of these problems. Scientology, for the first time in man's history, can predictably raise intelligence, increase ability, bring about a return to the ability to play a game, and permits man to escape from the dwindling spiral of his own disabilities. Therefore, work itself can become, again, a pleasant and happy thing. There is one thing that has been learned in Scientology which is very important to the state of mind of the workman. One very often feels in his society that he is working for the immediate paycheck and that he does not gain for the whole society anything of any importance. He does not know several things. One of these is how few good workmen are. On the level of executives, it is interesting to note how precious any large company finds a man who can handle and control jobs and men really is. Such people are rare. All the empty space in the structure of this workaday world is at the top. And there is another thing which is quite important, and that is the fact that the world today has been led to believe, by mental philosophies calculated to betray it, that when one is dead, it is all over and done with, and one has no further responsibility for anything. It is highly doubtful if this is true. One inherits tomorrow what he died out of yesterday. Another thing we know is that men are not dispensable. It is a mechanism of old philosophies to tell men that if they think they are indispensable, they should go down to the graveyard and take a look. Those men were indispensable too. This is the sheerest foolishness. If you really looked carefully in the graveyard, you would find the machinist who set the models going in yesteryear and without whom there would be no industry today. It is doubtful if such a feat is being performed just now. A workman is not just a workman. A laborer is not just a laborer. An office worker is not just an office worker. They are living, breathing, important pillars on which the entire structure of our civilization is erected. They are not cogs in a mighty machine. They are the machine itself. We have come to a low level of the ability to work. Offices depend very often on no more than 1 or 2 men, and the additional staffs seem to add only complexity to the activities of the scene. Countries move forward on the production of just a few factories. It is as though the world were being held together by a handful of desperate men who, by working themselves to death, may keep the rest of the world going. But again, they may not. It is to them that this is dedicated. A true group. A true group is one which has ideals, ethics, rationale, and a dynamic to carry forth its ideals and rationale on the ethics standard it has selected. The first right of any true group is to survive. All groups must have goals. Only the deterioration of the goals of the group, or the reaching of all the goals of the group, can bring about the decline of the group or the individuals within it. It is therefore incumbent upon any group to have a postulated set of goals which are continuing goals, to have a major goal which cannot be reached all in a breath, but also to have minor goals which go in progression toward major goals, which go in progression towards super-major goals. The group has the perfect right to demand the help, life, or, in a continuing sense, the energy and devotion of any member of the group. Any member of the group has the right to demand the most and highest level of the ideals, rationale, and ethics of the group, and to demand that these be maintained. A true group owes to its individual members their livelihood and a chance for their future generations. The members must not deny to the group its right to expand and perpetuate itself, but must contribute fully and wholly to these. An individual has the right to contribute to the group, and the group has the right to expect every individual to contribute to it to his maximum ability and energy. The individual has the right to expect to be contributed to from the group, and for the group to safeguard him, insofar as is possible in the maintenance of the group and the reaching by the group of its goals. The credo of a true group member. 1. The successful participant of a group is that participant who closely approximates, in his own activities, the ideal, ethic, and rationale of the overall group. 2. The responsibility of the individual for the group as a whole should not be less than the responsibility of the group for the individual. 3. The group member has, as part of his responsibility, the smooth operation of the entire group. 4. A group member must exert and insist upon his rights and prerogatives as a group member, and insist upon the rights and prerogatives of the group as a group, and let not these rights be diminished in any way or degree for any excuse or claimed expeditiousness. 5. The member of a true group must exert and practice his right to contribute to the group, and he must insist upon the right of the group to contribute to him. He should recognize that a myriad of group failures will result when either of these contributions is denied as a right. A welfare state being that state in which the member is not permitted to contribute to the state, but must take contribution from the state. 6. And turbulence of the affairs of the group by sudden shifts of plans unjustified by circumstances, breakdown of recognized channels, or cessation of useful operations in a group must be refused and blocked by the member of a group. He should take care not to enturbulate a manager and thus lower ARC. 7. Failure in planning or failure to recognize goals must be corrected by the group member for the group by calling the matter to conference or acting upon his own initiative. 8. A group member must coordinate his initiative with the goals and rationale of the entire group and with other individual members, well publishing his activities and intentions so that all conflicts may be brought forth in advance. 9. A group member must insist upon his right to have initiative. 10. A group member must study and understand and work with the goals, rationale, and executions of the group. 11. A group member must work toward becoming as expert as possible in his specialized technology and skill in the group, and must assist other individuals of the group to an understanding of that technology and skill and its place in the organizational necessities of the group. 12. A group member should have a working knowledge of all technologies and skills in the group in order to understand them and their place in the organizational necessities of the group. 13. On the group member depends the height of the ARC of the group. He must insist upon high-level communication lines and clarity in affinity and reality, and know the consequence of not having such conditions. And he must work continually and actively to maintain high ARC in the organization. 14. A group member has the right of pride in his tasks and a right of judgment and handling in those tasks. 15. A group member must recognize that he is, himself, a manager of some section of the group and/or its tasks, and that he himself must have both the knowledge and right of management in that sphere for which he is responsible. 16. The group member should not permit laws to be passed which limit or proscribe the activities of all the members of the group because of the failure of some of the members of the group. 17. The group member should insist on flexible planning and unerring execution of plans. 18. The performance of duty at optimum by every member of the group should be understood by the group member to be the best safeguard of his own and the group's survival. It is the pertinent business of any member of the group that optimum performance be achieved by any other member of the group, whether chain of command or similarity of activity sphere warrants such supervision or not. The credo of a good and skilled manager. To be effective and successful, a manager must 1. Understand as fully as possible the goals and aims of the group he manages. He must be able to see and embrace the ideal attainment of the goal as envisioned by a goal maker. He must be able to tolerate and better the practical attainments and advances of which his group and its members may be capable. He must strive to narrow always the ever-existing gulf between the ideal and the practical. 2. He must realize that a primary mission is the full and honest interpretation by himself of the ideal and ethic and their goals and aims to his subordinates and the group itself. He must lead creatively and persuasively toward these goals his subordinates, the group itself, and the individuals of the group. 3. He must embrace the organization and act solely for the entire organization and never form or favor cliques. His judgment of individuals of the group should be solely in the light of their worth to the entire group. 4. He must never falter in sacrificing individuals to the good of the group, both in planning and execution and in his justice. 5. He must protect all established communication lines and complement them where necessary. 6. He must protect all affinity in his charge and have himself an affinity for the group itself. 7. He must attain always to the highest creative reality. 8. His planning must accomplish, in the light of goals and aims, the activity of the entire group. He must never let organizations grow and sprawl, but, learning by pilots, must keep organizational planning fresh and flexible. 9. He must recognize in himself the rationale of the group and receive and evaluate the data out of which he makes his solutions with the highest attention to the truth of that data. 10. He must constitute himself on the orders of service to the group. 11. He must permit himself to be served well as to his individual requirements, practicing an economy of his own efforts and enjoying certain comforts to the end of keeping high his rationale. 12. He should require of his subordinates that they relay into their own spheres of management the whole and entire of his true feelings and the reasons for his decisions as clearly as they can be relayed and expanded and interpreted only for the greater understanding of the individuals governed by those subordinates. 13. He must never permit himself to pervert or mask any portion of the ideal and ethic on which the group operates, nor must he permit the ideal and ethic to grow old and outmoded and unworkable. He must never permit his planning to be perverted or censored by subordinates. He must never permit the ideal and ethic of the group's individual members to deteriorate, using always reason to interrupt such a deterioration. 14. He must have faith in the goals, faith in himself, and faith in the group. 15. He must lead by demonstrating always creative and constructive sub-goals. He must not drive by threat and fear. 16. He must realize that every individual in the group is engaged in some degree in the managing of other men, life, and the physical universe, and that a liberty of management within this code should be allowed to every such sub-manager. Thus conducting himself, a manager can win empire for his group, whatever that empire may be. On family. On marriage. Communication is the root of marital success from which a strong union can grow, and non-communication is the rock on which the ship will bash out her keel. In the first place, men and women aren't too careful on whom they up and marry. In the absence of any basic training about neurosis, psychosis, or how to judge a good cook or a good wage earner, that tricky, treacherous, and not always easy to identify thing called love is the sole guiding factor in the selection of mates. It is too much to expect of a society above the level of ants to be entirely practical about an institution as basically impractical as marriage. Thus, it is not amazing that the misselection of partners goes on with such abandon. There are ways, however, not only to select a marriage partner, but also to guarantee the continuation of that marriage, and these ways are simple. They depend uniformly upon communication. There should be some parity of intellect and sanity between a husband and wife for them to have a successful marriage. In Western culture, it is expected that the women shall have some command of the humanities and sciences. It is easy to establish the educational background of a potential marriage partner. It is not so easy to gauge their capability regarding sex, family, or children, or their sanity. In the past, efforts were made to establish sanity with ink blots, square blocks, and tests with marbles to find out if anybody had lost any. The resulting figures had to be personally interpreted with a crystal ball and then reinterpreted for application. In Scientology, there is a test for sanity and comparative sanity, which is so simple that anyone can apply it. What is the communication lag of the individual? When asked a question, how long does it take him to answer? When a remark is addressed to him, how long does it take for him to register and return? The fast answer tells of the fast mind and the sane mind, providing the answer is a sequitur. The slow answer tells of downscale. Marital partners who have the same communication lag will get along. Where one partner is fast and one is slow, the situation will become unbearable to the fast partner and miserable to the slow one. The repair of a marriage which is going on the rocks does not always require the processing of the marriage partners. It may be that another family factor is in the scene. This may be in the person of a relative, such as the mother-in-law. How does one solve this factor without using a shotgun? This, again, is simple. The mother-in-law, if there is trouble in the family, is responsible for cutting communication lines or diverting communication. One or the other of the partners, then, is cut off the communication channel on which he belongs. He senses this and objects strenuously to it. Jealousy is the largest factor in breaking up marriages. Jealousy comes about because of the insecurity of the jealous person, and the jealousy may or may not have foundation. This person is afraid of hidden communication lines and will do anything to try to uncover them. This acts upon the other partner to make him feel that his communication lines are being cut, for he thinks himself entitled to have open communication lines, whereas his marital partner insists that he shut many of them. The resultant rows are violent, as represented by the fact that where jealousy exists in a profession such as acting, insurance companies will not issue policies. The suicide rate is too high. The subject of marriage could not be covered in many chapters, but here are given the basic clues to a successful marriage. Communicate. How to live with children. The adult is the problem in child raising, not the child. An adult has certain rights around children which children and modern adults rather tend to ignore. A good, stable adult with love and tolerance in his heart is about the best therapy a child can have. The main consideration in raising children is the problem of training them without breaking them. The Jesuits had a system which is reported to have been workable, but the system perished with the Jesuits. In contradistinction, the American Medical Association, an organization devoted to efforts to control the practices of doctors, came out with a pamphlet, a masterpiece of nonsense, which was called How to Control Your Child. That's just what you don't want to do. You want to raise your child in such a way that you don't have to control him, so that he will be in full possession of himself at all times. Upon that depends his good behavior, his health, his sanity. The good ex-barbers, to the contrary, children are not dogs. They can't be trained like dogs are trained. They are not controllable items. They are, and let's not overlook the point, men and women. A child is not a special species of animal distinct from man. A child is a man or a woman who has not attained full growth. Any law which applies to the behavior of men and women applies to children. How would you like to be pulled and hauled and ordered about and restrained from doing whatever you wanted to do? You'd resent it. The only reason a child doesn't resent it is because he's small. You'd half murder somebody who treated you, an adult, with the orders, contradiction, and disrespect given to the average child. The child doesn't strike back because he isn't big enough. He gets your floor muddy, interrupts your nap, destroys the peace of the home instead. If he had equality with you in the matter of rights, he'd not ask for this revenge. This revenge is standard child behavior. A child has a right to his self-determinism. You say that if he is not restrained from pulling things down on him, running into the road, etc., he'll be hurt. What are you, as an adult, doing to make that child live in rooms or an environment where he can be hurt? The fault is yours, not his, if he breaks things. The sweetness and love of a child is preserved only so long as he can exert his own self-determinism. You interrupt that, and to a degree you interrupt his life. There are only two reasons why a child's right to decide for himself has to be interrupted: the fragility and danger of his environment, and you. For you work out on him the things that were done to you, regardless of what you think. There are two courses you can take. Give the child leeway in an environment he can't hurt, which can't badly hurt him, and which doesn't greatly restrict his space and time. And you can clean up your own aberrations to a point where your tolerance equals or surpasses his lack of education in how to please you. When you give a child something, it's his. It's not still yours. Clothes, toys, quarters, what he has been given must remain under his exclusive control. So he tears up his shirt, wrecks his bed, breaks his fire engine. It's none of your business. How would you like to have somebody give you a Christmas present and then tell you, day after day thereafter, what you are to do with it, and even punish you if you fail to care for it the way the donor thinks? You'd wreck that donor and ruin that present. You know you would. The child wrecks your nerves when you do it to him. That's revenge. He cries, he pesters you, he breaks your things, he accidentally spills his milk, and he wrecks the possession on purpose about which he is so often cautioned. Why? Because he is fighting for his own self-determinism, his own right to own and make his weight felt on his environment. This possession is another channel by which he can be controlled. So he has to fight the possession and the controller. Doubtless, the worthy ex-barbers were so poorly raised, they think control is the ne plus ultra of child raising. If you want to control your child, Simply break him into complete apathy, and he'll be as obedient as any hypnotized half-wit. If you want to know how to control him, get a book on dog training. Name the child Rex and teach him first to fetch, and then to sit up, and then to bark for his food. You can train a child that way. Sure you can. But it's your hard luck if he turns out to be a bloodletter. Only don't be half-hearted about it. Simply train him. Speak, Roger. Lie down. Roll over. Of course, you'll have a hard time of it. This, a slight medical oversight, is a human being. You better charge right in and do what you can to break him into apathy quick. A club is best. Tying him in a closet without food for a few days is fairly successful. The best recommended tactic, however, is simply to use a straitjacket and muffs on him until he is so docile and imbecilic that he couldn't be trained in anything but psychology for a profession. I'm warning you that it's going to be tough. It will be tough because man became king of the beasts only because he couldn't as a species be licked. He doesn't easily go into an obedient apathy like dogs do. Men own dogs because men are self-determined and dogs aren't. The reason people started to confuse children with dogs and to start training children with force lies in the field of psychology. The psychologist worked on principles as follows. Man is evil. Man must be trained into being a social animal. Man must adapt to his environment. As these postulates aren't true, psychology doesn't work. And if you ever saw a wreck, it's the child of a professional psychologist. Attention to the world around us instead of to texts somebody thought up after reading somebody's texts shows us the fallacy of these postulates. The reason Scientology does what it does is because Scientology is based on some workable postulates. Psychology didn't even know you had to have postulates and axioms to have a science, didn't even realize that the above constituted their basic creed. The above is formulated from an inspection of their vast tomes. The actuality is quite opposite the previous beliefs. The truth lies in this direction. Man is basically good. Only by severe aberration can man be made evil. Severe training drives him into non-sociability. Man must retain his personal ability to adapt his environment to him to remain sane. A man is as sane and safe as he is self-determined. In raising your child, you must avoid training him into a social animal. Your child begins by being more sociable, more dignified than you are. In a relatively short time, the treatment he gets so checks him that he revolts. This revolt can be intensified until he is a terror to have around. He will be noisy, thoughtless, careless of possessions, unclean, anything in short which will annoy you. Train him, control him, and you'll lose his love. You've lost the child forever that you seek to control and own. Permit a child to sit on your lap. He'll sit there contented. Now put your arms around him and constrain him to sit there. Do this even though he wasn't even trying to leave. Instantly, he'll squirm. He'll fight to get away from you. He'll get angry. He'll cry. Recall now, he was happy before you started to hold him. You should actually make this experiment. Your efforts to mold, train, control this child in general react on him exactly like trying to hold him on your lap. Of course, you will have difficulty if this child of yours has already been trained, controlled, ordered about, denied his own possessions. In mid-flight, you change your tactics. You try to give him his freedom. He's so suspicious of you, he will have a terrible time trying to adjust. The transition period will be terrible, but at the end of it, you'll have a well-ordered, well-trained, social child, thoughtful of you and, very important to you, a child who loves you. The child who is under constraint, shepherded, handled, controlled, has a very bad anxiety postulated. His parents are survival entities. They mean food, clothing, shelter, affection. This means he wants to be near them. He wants to love them, naturally being their child. But on the other hand, his parents are non-survival entities. His whole being and life depend upon his rights to use his own decision about his movements and his possessions and his body. Parents seek to interrupt this out of the mistaken idea that a child is an idiot who won't learn unless controlled. So he has to fight shy, to fight against, to annoy and harass an enemy. Here is anxiety. I love them dearly. I also need them, but they mean an interruption of my ability, my mind, my potential life. What am I going to do about my parents? I can't live with them. I can't live without them. Oh dear, oh dear. There he sits in his rompers, running this problem through his head. That problem, that anxiety will be with him for 18 years, more or less, and it will half wreck his life. Freedom for the child means freedom for you. Abandoning the possessions of the child to their fate means eventual safety for the child's possessions. What terrible willpower is demanded of a parent not to give constant streams of directions to a child? What agony to watch his possessions going to ruin? What upset to refuse to order his time and space? But it has to be done if you want a well, a happy, a careful, a beautiful, and intelligent child. Another thing is the matter of contribution. You have no right to deny your child the right to contribute. A human being feels able and competent only so long as he is permitted to contribute as much as or more than he has contributed to him. A man can over-contribute and feel secure in an environment. He feels insecure the moment he under-contributes, which is to say gives less than he receives. If you don't believe this, recall a time when everyone else brought something to the party but you didn't. How did you feel? A human being will revolt against and distrust any source which contributes to him more than he contributes to it. Parents naturally contribute more to a child than the child contributes back. As soon as the child sees this, he becomes unhappy. He seeks to raise his contribution level. Failing, he gets angry at the contribution source. He begins to detest his parents. They try to override this revolt by contributing more. The child revolts more. It is a bad, dwindling spiral, because the end of it is that the child will go into apathy. You must let the child contribute to you. You can't order him to contribute. You can't command him to mow the grass and then think that that's contribution. He has to figure out what his contribution is and then give it. If he hasn't selected it, it isn't his, but only more control. A baby contributes by trying to make you smile. The baby will show off. A little older, he will dance for you, bring you sticks, try to repeat your work motions to help you. If you don't accept those smiles, those dances, those sticks, those work motions in the spirit they are given, you have begun to interrupt the child's contribution. Now he will start to get anxious. He will do unthinking and strange things to your possessions in an effort to make them better for you. You scold him. That finishes him. Something else enters in here, and that is data. How can a child possibly know what to contribute to you or his family or home if he hasn't any idea of the working principles on which it runs? A family is a group with the common goal of group survival and advancement. The child, not allowed to contribute or failing to understand the goals and working principles of family life, is cast adrift from the family. He is shown he is not part of the family because he can't contribute. So he becomes anti-family, the first step on the road to being antisocial. He spills milk, annoys your guests, and yells outside your window in play. He'll even get sick just to make you work. He is shown to be nothing by being shown that he isn't powerful enough to contribute. You can do nothing more than accept the smiles, the dances, the sticks of the very young. But as soon as a child can understand, he should be given the whole story of the family operation. What is the source of his allowance? How come there's food, clothes, a clean house, a car? Daddy works. He expends hours and brains and brawn, and for this he gets money. The money, handed over at a store, buys food. A car is cared for because of money scarcity. A calm house and care of Daddy means Daddy works better, and that means food and clothes and cars. Education is necessary because one earns better after he has learned. Play is necessary in order to give a reason for hard work. Give him the whole picture. If he's been revolting, he may keep right on revolting. but he'll eventually come around. First of all, a child needs security. Part of that security is understanding. Part of it is a code of conduct which is invariable. What is against law today can't be ignored tomorrow. You can actually punish a child to defend your rights, so long as he owns what he owns and can contribute to you and work for you. Adults have rights. He ought to know this. A child has as his goal growing up. If an adult doesn't have more rights, why grow up? Who the devil would be an adult in this year of our Lord anyway? The child has a duty toward you. He has to be able to take care of you. Not an illusion that he is, but actually. And you have to have patience to allow yourself to be cared for sloppily until, by sheer experience itself, not by your directions, he learns how to do it well. Care for the child? Nonsense. He's probably got a better grasp of immediate situations than you have, you beaten-up adult. Only when he's almost psychotic with aberration will a child be an accident-prone. You're well and enjoy life because you aren't owned. You couldn't enjoy life if you were shepherded and owned. You'd revolt, and if your revolt was quenched, you'd turn into a subversive. That's what you make out of your child when you own, manage, and control him. Potentially, parent, he's saner than you are, and the world is a lot brighter. His sense of values and reality are sharper. Don't dull them. And your child will be a fine, tall, successful human being. Own, control, manage, and reject, and you'll get the treatment you deserve. Subversive revolt. Now, are we going to have a happy house around here? Or aren't we? On how to get along with others. 2 rules for happy living. 1. Be able to experience anything. 2. Cause only those things which others are able to experience easily. Man has had many golden rules. The Buddhist rule of do unto others as you would have these others do unto you has been repeated often in other religions. But such golden rules, while they served to advance man above the animal, resulted in no sure sanity, success, or happiness. Such a golden rule gives only the cause point, or at best the reflexive effect point. This is a self-done-to-self thing and tends to put all on obsessive cause. It gives no thought to what one does about the things done to one by others not so indoctrinated. How does one handle the evil things done to him? It is not told in the Buddhist rule. Many random answers resulted. Amongst them are the answers of Christian Science. Effects on self don't exist. The answers of early Christians. Become a martyr. The answers of Christian ministers. Condemn all sin. Such answers to effects created on one bring about a somewhat less than sane state of mind, to say nothing of unhappiness. After one's house has burned down and the family cremated, it is no great consolation to A. pretend it didn't happen, B. liken oneself to Job, or C. condemn all arsonists. So long as one fears or suffers from the effect of violence, one will have violence against him. When one can experience exactly what is being done to one, magic! It does not happen. How to be happy in this universe is a problem few prophets or sages have dared contemplate directly. We find them handling the problem of happiness by assuring us that man is doomed to suffering. They seek not to tell us how to be happy, but how to endure being unhappy. Such casual assumption of the impossibility of happiness has led us to ignore any real examination of ways to be happy. Thus, we have floundered forward toward a negative goal. Get rid of all the unhappiness on earth, and one would have a livable earth. If one seeks to get rid of something continually, one admits continually he cannot confront it, and thus everyone went downhill. Life became a dwindling spiral of more things we could not confront, and thus we went toward blindness and unhappiness. To be happy, one only must be able to confront, which is to say, experience, those things that are. Unhappiness is only this: the inability to confront that which is. Hence, 1. Be able to experience anything. The effect side of life deserves great consideration. The self-caused side also deserves examination. To create only those effects which others could easily experience gives us a clean new rule of living. For if one does, then what might he do that he must withhold from others? There is no reason to withhold his own actions or regret them, same thing, if one's own actions are easily experienced by others. This is a sweeping test and definition of good conduct: to do only those things which others can experience. If you examine a person's life, you will find he is hung up only in those actions he did which others were not able to receive. Hence, a person's life can become a hodgepodge of violence withheld, which pulls in, then, the violence others caused. The more actions a person emanated which could not be experienced by others, the worse a person's life became. Recognizing that he was bad cause, or that there were too many bad causes already, a person ceased causing things, an unhappy state of being. Pain, misemotion, unconsciousness, insanity all result from causing things others could not experience easily. All bad acts, then, are those acts which cannot be easily experienced at the target end. On this definition, let us review our own bad acts. Which ones were bad? Only those that could not be easily experienced by another were bad. Thus, which of society's favorite bad acts are bad? Acts of real violence resulting in pain, unconsciousness, insanity, and heavy loss could at this time be considered bad. Well, what other acts of yours do you consider bad? The things which you have done which you could not easily yourself experience were bad. But the things which you have done which you yourself could have experienced, had they been done to you, were not bad. That certainly changes one's view of things. There is no need to lead a violent life just to prove one can experience. The idea is not to prove one can experience, but to regain the ability to experience, which can be accomplished in Scientology processing. Thus, today we have 2 golden rules for happiness. 1, be able to experience anything, and 2, cause only those things which others are able to experience easily. Your reaction to these tells you how far you have yet to go. And if you achieve these 2 golden rules, you would be one of the happiest and most successful people in this universe. For who could rule you with evil? What is greatness? The hardest task one can have is to continue to love his fellows despite all reasons he should not. And the true sign of sanity and greatness is to so continue. For the one who can achieve this, there is abundant hope. For those who cannot, there is only sorrow, hatred, and despair. And these are not the things of which greatness, or sanity, or happiness are made. A primary trap is to succumb to invitations to hate. There are those who appoint one their executioners. Sometimes, for the sake of safety of others, it is necessary to act, but it is not necessary to also hate them. To do one's task without becoming furious at others who seek to prevent one is a mark of greatness and sanity. And only then can one be happy. Seeking to achieve any single desirable quality in life is a noble thing. The one most difficult and most necessary to achieve is to love one's fellows despite all invitations to do otherwise. If there is any saintly quality, it is not to forgive. Forgiveness accepts the badness of the act. There is no reason to accept it. Further, one has to label the act as bad to forgive it. Forgiveness is a much lower level action and is rather censorious. True greatness merely refuses to change in the face of bad actions against one, and a truly great person loves his fellows because he understands them. After all, they are all in the same trap. Some are oblivious of it, some have gone mad because of it, some act like those who betrayed them. But all are in the same trap. The generals, the street sweepers, the presidents, the insane. They act the way they do because they are all subject to the same cruel pressures of this universe. Some of us are subject to those pressures and still go on doing our jobs. Others have long since succumbed and rave and torture and strut like the demented souls they are. We can at least understand the one fact that greatness does not stem from savage wars or being known. It stems from being true to one's own decency, from going on helping others whatever they do or think or say, and despite all savage acts against one, to persevere without changing one's basic attitude toward man. To that degree, true greatness depends on total wisdom. They act as they do because they are what they are. Trapped beings, crushed beneath an intolerable burden. And if they have gone mad for it and command the devastation of whole nations in eras of explanation, still one can understand why and can understand as well the extent of their madness. Why should one change and begin to hate just because others have lost themselves and their own destinies are too cruel for them to face? Justice, mercy, forgiveness, all are unimportant beside the ability not to change because of provocation or demands to do so. One must act, one must preserve order and decency, but one need not hate or seek vengeance. It is true that beings are frail and commit wrongs. Man is basically good, but man can act badly. He only acts badly when his acts, done for order and the safety for others, are done with hatred, or when his disciplines are founded only upon safety for himself, regardless of all others, or worse, when he acts only out of a taste for cruelty. To preserve no order at all is an insane act. One need only look at the possessions and environment of the insane to realize this. The able keep good order. When cruelty in the name of discipline dominates a race, that race has been taught to hate, and that race is doomed. The real lesson is to learn to love. He who would walk scatheless through his days must learn this: never use what is done to one as a basis for hatred. Never desire revenge. It requires real strength to love man, and to love him despite all invitations to do otherwise, all provocations and all reasons why one should not. Happiness and strength endure only in the absence of hate. To hate alone is the road to disaster. To love is the road to strength. To love in spite of all is the secret of greatness, and may very well be the greatest secret in this universe. On human behavior. The antisocial personality. There are certain characteristics and mental attitudes which cause about 20% of a race to oppose violently any betterment activity or group. Such people are known to have antisocial tendencies. When the legal or political structure of a country becomes such as to favor such personalities in positions of trust, then all the civilizing organizations of the country become suppressed and a barbarism of criminality and economic duress ensues. Crime and criminal acts are perpetrated by antisocial personalities. Inmates of institutions commonly trace their state back to contact with such personalities. Thus, in the fields of government, police activities, and mental health, to name a few, we see that it is important to be able to detect and isolate this personality type so as to protect society and individuals from the destructive consequences attendant upon letting such have free rein to injure others. As they only comprise 20% of the population, and as only 2.5% of this 20% are truly dangerous, we see that with a very small amount of effort, we could considerably better the state of society. Well-known, even stellar examples of such a personality are, of course, Napoleon and Hitler. Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, Christie, and other famous criminals were well-known examples of the antisocial personality. But with such a cast of characters in history, we neglect the less stellar examples and do not perceive that such personalities exist in current life, very common, often undetected. When we trace the cause of a failing business, we will inevitably discover somewhere in its ranks the antisocial personality hard at work. In families which are breaking up, we commonly find one or the other of the persons involved to have such a personality. Where life has become rough and is failing, a careful review of the area by a trained observer will detect one or more such personalities at work. As there are 80% of us trying to get along and only 20% trying to prevent us, our lives would be much easier to live were we well informed as to the exact manifestations of such a personality. Thus, we could detect it and save ourselves much failure and heartbreak. It is important, then, to examine and list the attributes of the antisocial personality. Influencing as it does the daily lives of so many, it well behooves decent people to become better informed on this subject. Attributes. The antisocial personality has the following attributes. 1. He or she speaks only in very broad generalities. They say, "Everybody thinks," "Everyone knows," and such expressions are in continual use, particularly when imparting rumor. When asked, "Who is everybody?" it normally turns out to be one source, and from this source the antisocial person has manufactured what he or she pretends is the whole opinion of the whole society. This is natural to them, since to them all society is a large hostile generality against the antisocial in particular. 2. Such a person deals mainly in bad news, critical or hostile remarks, invalidation, and general suppression. Gossip, or harbinger of evil tidings, or rumormonger once described such persons. It is notable that there is no good news or complimentary remark passed on by such a person. 3. The antisocial personality alters, to worsen, communication when he or she relays a message or news. Good news is stopped, and only bad news, often embellished, is passed along. Such a person also pretends to pass on bad news, which is in actual fact invented. 4. A characteristic and one of the sad things about an antisocial personality is that it does not respond to treatment or reform or psychotherapy. 5. Surrounding such a personality, we find cowed or ill associates or friends who, when not driven actually insane, are yet behaving in a crippled manner in life, failing, not succeeding. Such people make trouble for others. When treated or educated, the near associate of the antisocial personality has no stability of gain, but promptly relapses or loses his advantages of knowledge, being under the suppressive influence of the other. Physically treated, such associates commonly do not recover in the expected time, but worsen and have poor convalescences. It is quite useless to treat or help or train such persons, so long as they remain under the influence of the antisocial connection. The largest number of insane are insane because of such antisocial connections and do not recover easily for the same reason. Unjustly, we seldom see the antisocial personality actually in an institution. Only his friends and family are there. 6. The antisocial personality selects habitually the wrong target. If a tire is flat from driving over nails, he or she curses a companion or a non-causative source of the trouble. If the radio next door is too loud, he or she kicks the cat. If A is the obvious cause, the antisocial personality inevitably blames B or C or D. 7. The antisocial cannot finish a cycle of action. Such becomes surrounded with incomplete projects. 8. Many antisocial persons will freely confess to the most alarming crimes when forced to do so, but will have no faintest sense of responsibility for them. Their actions have little or nothing to do with their own volition. Things just happen. They have no sense of correct causation, and particularly cannot feel any sense of remorse or shame, therefore. 9. The antisocial personality supports only destructive groups and rages against and attacks any constructive or betterment group. 10. This type of personality approves only of destructive actions and fights against constructive or helpful actions or activities. The artist in particular is often found as a magnet for persons with antisocial personalities who see in his art something which must be destroyed and covertly, as a friend, proceed to try. 11. Helping others is an activity which drives the antisocial personality nearly berserk. Activities, however, which destroy in the name of help are closely supported. 12. The antisocial personality has a bad sense of property and conceives that the idea that anyone owns anything is a pretense made up to fool people. Nothing is ever really owned. The basic reason the antisocial personality behaves as he or she does lies in a hidden terror of others. To such a person, every other being is an enemy to be covertly or overtly destroyed. The fixation is that survival itself depends on keeping others down or keeping people ignorant. If anyone were to promise to make others stronger or brighter, the antisocial personality suffers the utmost agony of personal danger. They reason that if they are in this much trouble with people around them, weak or stupid, they would perish should anyone become strong or bright. Such a person has no trust to a point of terror. This is usually masked and unrevealed. When such a personality goes insane, the world is full of Martians or the FBI, and each person met is really a Martian or FBI agent. But the bulk of such people exhibit no outward signs of insanity. They appear quite rational. They can be very convincing. However, the list given above consists of things which such a personality cannot detect in himself or herself. This is so true that if you thought you found yourself in one of the above, you most certainly are not antisocial. Self-criticism is a luxury the antisocial cannot afford. They must be right because they are in continual danger in their own estimation. If you proved one wrong, you might even send him or her into a severe illness. Only the sane, well-balanced person tries to correct his conduct. Relief. If you were to weed out of your past those antisocial persons you have known, and if you then disconnected, you might experience great relief. Similarly, if society were to recognize this personality type as a sick being as they now isolate people with smallpox, both social and economic recoveries could occur. Things are not likely to get much better so long as 20% of the population is permitted to dominate and injure the lives and enterprise of the remaining 80%. As majority rule is the political manner of the day, so should majority sanity express itself in our daily lives without the interference and destruction of the socially unwell. The pity of it is, they will not permit themselves to be helped and would not respond to treatment if help were attempted. An understanding and ability to recognize such personalities could bring a major change in society and our lives. The social personality. Man in his anxieties is prone to witch hunts. All one has to do is designate people wearing black caps as the villains, and one can start a slaughter of people in black caps. This characteristic makes it very easy for the antisocial personality to bring about a chaotic or dangerous environment. Man is not naturally brave or calm in his human state, and he is not necessarily villainous. Even the antisocial personality, in his warped way, is quite certain that he is acting for the best and commonly sees himself as the only good person around, doing all for the good of everyone. the only flaw in his reasoning being that if one kills everyone else, none are left to be protected from the imagined evils. His conduct in his environment and toward his fellows is the only method of detecting either the antisocial or the social personalities. Their motives for self are similar: self-preservation and survival. They simply go about achieving these in different ways. Thus, as man is naturally neither calm nor brave, anyone to some degree tends to be alert to dangerous persons, and hence witch hunts can begin. It is therefore even more important to identify the social personality than the antisocial personality. One then avoids shooting the innocent out of mere prejudice or dislike, or because of some momentary misconduct. The social personality can be defined most easily by comparison with his opposite, the antisocial personality. This differentiation is easily done, and no test should ever be constructed which isolates only the antisocial. On the same test must appear the upper as well as lower ranges of man's actions. A test that declares only antisocial personalities without also being able to identify the social personality would be itself a suppressive test. It would be like answering yes or no to the question, "Do you still beat your wife?" Anyone who took it could be found guilty. While this mechanism might have suited the times of the Inquisition, it would not suit modern needs. As the society runs, prospers, and lives solely through the efforts of social personalities, one must know them as they, not the antisocial, are the worthwhile people. These are the people who must have rights and freedom. Attention is given to the antisocial solely to protect and assist the social personalities in the society. All majority rules, civilizing intentions, and even the human race will fail unless one can identify and thwart the antisocial personalities and help and forward the social personalities in the society. For the very word society implies social conduct, and without it there is no society at all, only a barbarism with all men, good or bad, at risk. The frailty of showing how the harmful people can be known is that these then apply the characteristics to decent people to get them hunted down and eradicated. The swan song of every great civilization is the tune played by arrows, axes, or bullets used by the antisocial to slay the last decent men. Government is only dangerous when it can be employed by and for antisocial personalities. The end result is the eradication of all social personalities and the resultant collapse of Egypt, Babylon, Rome, Russia, or the West. You will note in the characteristics of the antisocial personality that intelligence is not a clue to the antisocial. They are bright or stupid or average. Thus, those who are extremely intelligent can rise to considerable, even head of state heights. Importance and ability or wish to rise above others are likewise not indexes to the antisocial. When they do become important or rise, they are, however, rather visible by the broad consequences of their acts. But they are as likely to be unimportant people or hold very lowly stations and wish for nothing better. Thus it is the 12 given characteristics alone which identify the antisocial personality. And these same 12 reversed are the sole criteria of the social personality, if one wishes to be truthful about them. The identification or labeling of an antisocial personality cannot be done honestly and accurately unless one also, in the same examination of the person, reviews the positive side of his life. All persons under stress can react with momentary flashes of antisocial conduct. This does not make them antisocial personalities. The true antisocial person has a majority of antisocial characteristics. The social personality has a majority of social characteristics. Thus, one must examine the good with the bad before one can truly label the antisocial or the social. In reviewing such matters, very broad testimony and evidence are best. One or two isolated instances determine nothing. One should search all 12 social and all 12 antisocial characteristics and decide on the basis of actual evidence, not opinion. The 12 primary characteristics of the social personality are as follows. 1. The social personality is specific in relating circumstances. Joe Jones said, the Star newspaper reported, and gives sources of data where important or possible. He may use the generality of they or people, but seldom in connection with attributing statements or opinions of an alarming nature. 2. The social personality is eager to relay good news and reluctant to relay bad. He may not even bother to pass along criticism when it doesn't matter. He is more interested in making another feel liked or wanted than disliked by others, and tends to err toward reassurance rather than toward criticism. 3. A social personality passes communication without much alteration, and if deleting anything, tends to delete injurious matters. He does not like to hurt people's feelings. He sometimes errs in holding back bad news or orders which seem critical or harsh. 4. Treatment, reform, and psychotherapy, particularly of a mild nature, work very well on the social personality. Whereas antisocial people sometimes promise to reform, they do not. Only the social personality can change or improve easily. It is often enough to point out unwanted conduct to a social personality to completely alter it for the better. Criminal codes and violent punishment are not needed to regulate social personalities. 5. The friends and associates of a social personality tend to be well, happy, and of good morale. A truly social personality quite often produces betterment in health or fortune by his mere presence on the scene. At the very least, he does not reduce the existing levels of health or morale in his associates. When ill, the social personality heals or recovers in an expected manner and is found open to successful treatment. 6. The social personality tends to select correct targets for correction. He fixes the tire that is flat rather than attack the windscreen. In the mechanical arts, he can therefore repair things and make them work. 7. Cycles of action begun are ordinarily completed by the social personality if possible. 8. The social personality is ashamed of his misdeeds and reluctant to confess them. He takes responsibility for his errors. 9. The social personality supports constructive groups and tends to protest or resist destructive groups. 10. Destructive actions are protested by the social personality. He assists constructive or helpful actions. 11. The social personality helps others and actively resists acts which harm others. 12. Property is property of someone to the social personality, and its theft or misuse is prevented or frowned upon. The basic motivation. The social personality naturally operates on the basis of the greatest good. He is not haunted by imagined enemies, but he does recognize real enemies when they exist. The social personality wants to survive and wants others to survive, whereas the antisocial personality really and covertly wants others to succumb. Basically, the social personality wants others to be happy and do well, whereas the antisocial personality is very clever in making others do very badly indeed. A basic clue to the social personality is not really his successes, but his motivations. The social personality, when successful, is often a target for the antisocial, and by this reason, he may fail. But his intentions included others in his success, whereas the antisocial only appreciate the doom of others. Unless we can detect the social personality and hold him safe from undue restraint, and detect also the antisocial and restrain him, our society will go on suffering from insanity, criminality, and war, and man and civilization will not endure. Of all our technical skills, such differentiation ranks the highest, since failing, no other skill can continue, as the base on which it operates, civilization, will not be here to continue it. Do not smash the social personality, and do not fail to render powerless the antisocial in their efforts to harm the rest of us. Just because a man rises above his fellows or takes an important post does not make him an antisocial personality. Just because a man can control or dominate others does not make him an antisocial personality. It is his motives in doing so and the consequences of his acts which distinguish the antisocial from the social. Unless we realize and apply the true characteristics of the two types of personality, we will continue to live in a quandary of who our enemies are, and in doing so, victimize our friends. All men have committed acts of violence or omission for which they could be censured. In all mankind, there is not one single perfect human being. But there are those who try to do right and those who specialize in wrong, and upon these facts and characteristics you can know them. The third-party law. I have for a very long time studied the causes of violence and conflict amongst individuals and nations. If Chaldea could vanish, if Babylon could turn to dust, if Egypt could become a Badlands, if Sicily could have 160 prosperous cities and be a looted ruin before the year 0 and a near desert ever since, and all this in spite of all the work and wisdom and good wishes and intent of human beings, then it must follow, as the dark follows sunset, that something must be unknown to man concerning all his works and ways, and that this something must be so deadly and so pervasive as to destroy all his ambitions and his chances long before their time. Such a thing would have to be some natural law unguessed at by himself. And there is such a law, apparently, that answers these conditions of being deadly, unknown, and embracing all activities. The law would seem to be: a third party must be present and unknown in every quarrel for a conflict to exist. Or, for a quarrel to occur, an unknown third party must be active in producing it between two potential opponents. Or, while it is commonly believed to take two to make a fight, a third party must exist and must develop it for actual conflict to occur. It is very easy to see that two in conflict are fighting. They are very visible. What is harder to see or suspect is that a third party existed and actively promoted the quarrel. The usually unsuspected and reasonable third party, the bystander who denies any part of it, is the one that brought the conflict into existence in the first place. The hidden third party, seeming at times to be a supporter of only one side, is to be found as the instigator. This is a useful law in many aspects of life. It is the cause of war. One sees two fellows shouting bad names at each other, sees them come to blows. No one else is around, so they, of course, caused the fight. But there was a third party. Tracing these down, one comes upon incredible data. That is the trouble. The incredible is too easily rejected. One way to hide things is to make them incredible. Clerk A and Messenger B have been arguing. They blaze into direct conflict. Each blames the other. Neither one is correct, and so the quarrel does not resolve since its true cause is not established. One looks into such a case thoroughly. He finds the incredible. The wife of Clerk A has been sleeping with Messenger B and complaining alike to both about the other. Farmer J and Rancher K have been tearing each other to pieces for years in continual conflict. There are obvious logical reasons for the fight, yet it continues and does not resolve. A close search finds Banker L, who, due to their losses in the fighting, is able to loan each side money while keeping the quarrel going, and who will get their lands completely if both lose. It goes larger. The revolutionary forces and the Russian government were in conflict in 1917. The reasons are so many, the attention easily sticks on them. But only when Germany's official state papers were captured in World War II was it revealed that Germany had promoted the revolt and financed Lenin to spark it off, even sending him into Russia in a blacked-out train. One looks over personal quarrels, group conflicts, national battles, and one finds, if he searches, the third party, unsuspected by both combatants, or if suspected at all, brushed off as fantastic, yet careful documentation finally affirms it. This datum is fabulously useful. In marital quarrels, the correct approach of anyone counseling is to get both parties to carefully search out the third party. They may come to many reasons at first. These reasons are not beings. One is looking for a third party, an actual being. When both find the third party and establish proof, that will be the end of the quarrel. Sometimes two parties, quarreling, suddenly decide to elect a being to blame. This stops the quarrel. Sometimes it is not the right being, and more quarrels thereafter occur. Two nations at each other's throats should each seek conference with the other to sift out and locate the actual third party. They will always find one if they look, and they can find the right one, as it will be found to exist in fact. There are probably many technical approaches one could develop and outline in this matter. There are many odd phenomena connected with it. An accurately spotted third party is usually not fought at all by either party, but only shunned. Marital conflicts are common. Marriages can be saved by both parties really sorting out who caused the conflicts. There may have been, in the whole history of the marriage, several, but only one at a time. Quarrels between an individual and an organization are nearly always caused by an individual third party or a third group. The organization and the individual should get together and isolate the third party by displaying to each other all the data they each have been fed. Rioters and governments alike could be brought back to agreement could one get representatives of both to give each other what they have been told by whom. Such conferences have tended to deal only in recriminations or conditions or abuses. They must deal in beings only in order to succeed. This theory might be thought to assert also that there are no bad conditions that cause conflict. There are. But these are usually remedial by conference unless a third party is promoting conflict. In history, we have a very foul opinion of the past because it is related by recriminations of two opponents and has not spotted the third party. Underlying causes of war should read, hidden promoters. There are no conflicts which cannot be resolved unless the true promoters of them remain hidden. This is the natural law the ancients and moderns alike did not know. And not knowing it, being led off into reasons, whole civilizations have died. It is worth knowing. It is worth working with in any situation where one is trying to bring peace. On honesty and ethics. Honest people have rights too. After you have achieved a high level of ability, you will be the first to insist upon your rights to live with honest people. When you know the technology of the mind, you know that it is a mistake to use individual rights and freedom as arguments to protect those who would only destroy. Individual rights were not originated to protect criminals, but to bring freedom to honest men. Into this area of protection, then, dived those who needed freedom and individual liberty to cover their own questionable activities. Freedom is for honest people. No man who is not himself honest can be free. He is his own trap. When his own deeds cannot be disclosed, then he is a prisoner. He must withhold himself from his fellows and is a slave to his own conscience. Freedom must be deserved before any freedom is possible. To protect dishonest people is to condemn them to their own hells. By making individual rights a synonym for protect the criminal, one helps bring about a slave state for all. For where individual liberty is abused, an impatience with it arises which at length sweeps us all away. The targets of all disciplinary laws are the few who err. Such laws unfortunately also injure and restrict those who do not err. If all were honest, there would be no disciplinary threats. There is only one way out for a dishonest person: facing up to his own responsibilities in the society and putting himself back into communication with his fellow man, his family, the world at large. By seeking to invoke his individual rights to protect himself from an examination of his deeds, he reduces just that much the future of individual liberty, for he himself is not free. Yet he infects others who are honest by using their right to freedom to protect himself. Uneasy lies the head that wears a guilty conscience, and it will lie no more easily by seeking to protect misdeeds by pleas of, "Freedom means that you must never look at me." The right of a person to survive is directly related to his honesty. Freedom for man does not mean freedom to injure man. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom to harm by lies. Man cannot be free while there are those amongst him who are slaves to their own terrors. The mission of a techno-space society is to subordinate the individual and control him by economic and political duress. The only casualty in a machine age is the individual and his freedom. To preserve that freedom, one must not permit men to hide their evil intentions under the protection of that freedom. To be free, a man must be honest with himself and with his fellows. If a man uses his own honesty to protest the unmasking of dishonesty, then that man is an enemy of his own freedom. We can stand in the sun only so long as we do not let the deeds of others bring the darkness. Freedom is for honest men. Individual liberty exists only for those who have the ability to be free. Today in Scientology, we know the jailer, the person himself. And we can restore the right to stand in the sun by eradicating the evil men do to themselves. Who would punish when he could salvage? Only a madman would break a wanted object when he could repair it. And we are not mad. The individual must not die in this machine age, rights or no rights. The criminal and madman must not triumph with their newfound tools of destruction. The least free person is the person who cannot reveal his own acts and who protests the revelation of the improper acts of others. On such people will be built a future political slavery where we all have numbers and our guilt unless we act. It is fascinating that blackmail and punishment are the keynotes of all dark operations. What would happen if these two commodities no longer existed? What would happen if all men were free enough to speak? Then and only then would you have freedom. On the day when we can fully trust each other, there will be peace on earth. Ethics, justice, and the dynamics. Every being has an infinite ability to survive. How well he accomplishes this is dependent on how well he uses ethics on his dynamics. See the 8 dynamics in this book. Ethics technology exists for the individual. It exists to give the individual a way to increase his survival and thus free himself from the dwindling spiral of the current culture. Ethics. The whole subject of ethics is one which, with the society in its current state, has become almost lost. Ethics actually consists of rationality toward the highest level of survival for the individual, the future race, the group, mankind, and the other dynamics taken up collectively. Ethics are reason. Man's greatest weapon is his reason. The highest ethic level would be long-term survival concepts with minimal destruction along all of the dynamics. An optimum solution to any problem would be that solution which brought the greatest benefits to the greatest number of dynamics. The poorest solution would be that solution which brought the greatest harm to the most number of dynamics. Activities which brought minimal survival to a lesser number of dynamics and damaged the survival of a greater number of dynamics could not be considered rational activities. One of the reasons that this society is dying and so forth is that it's gone too far out ethics. Reasonable conduct and optimum solutions have ceased to be used to such an extent that the society is on the way out. By out ethics, we mean an action or situation in which an individual is involved, or something the individual does, which is contrary to the ideals, best interests, and survival of his dynamics. For a man to develop a weapon capable of destroying all life on this planet, as has been done with atomic weapons and certain drugs designed by the military, and place it in the hands of the criminally insane politicians is obviously not a survival act. For the government to actively invite and create inflation to a point where a depression is a real threat to the individuals of this society is a non-survival action, to say the least. This gets so batty that in one of the South Pacific societies, infanticide became a ruling passion. There was a limited supply of food, and they wanted to keep down the birth rate. They began using abortion, and if this didn't work, they killed the children. Their second dynamic folded up. That society has almost disappeared. These are acts calculated to be destructive and harmful to the survival of the people of the society. Ethics are the actions an individual takes on himself in order to accomplish optimum survival for himself and others on all dynamics. Ethical actions are survival actions. Without a use of ethics, we will not survive. We know that the dynamic principle of existence is survive. At first glance, that may seem too basic. It may seem too simple. When one thinks of survival, one is apt to make the error of thinking in terms of barest necessity. That is not survival. Survival is a graduated scale, with infinity or immortality at the top and death and pain at the bottom. Good and evil, right and wrong. Years ago, I discovered and proved that man is basically good. This means that the basic personality and the basic intentions of the individual toward himself and others are good. When a person finds himself committing too many harmful acts against the dynamics, he becomes his own executioner. This gives us the proof that man is basically good. When he finds himself committing too many evils, then, causatively, unconsciously, or unwittingly, man puts ethics in on himself by destroying himself, and he does himself in without assistance from anybody else. This is why the criminal leaves clues on the scene, why people develop strange incapacitating illnesses, and why they cause themselves accidents and even decide to have an accident. When they violate their own ethics, they begin to decay. They do this all on their own, without anybody else doing anything. The criminal who leaves clues behind is doing so in hopes that someone will come along to stop him from continuing to harm others. He is basically good and does not want to harm others. And in the absence of an ability to stop himself outright, he attempts to put ethics in on himself by getting thrown in prison where he will no longer be able to commit crimes. Similarly, the person who incapacitates himself with illness or gets himself in an accident is putting ethics in on himself by lessening his ability to harm and maybe even by totally removing himself from the environment that he has been harming. When he has evil intentions, when he is being intentionally evil, he still has an urge to also stop himself. He seeks to suppress them, and when he cannot do so directly, he does so indirectly. Evil, illness, and decay often go hand in hand. Man is basically good. He is basically well-intentioned. He does not want to harm himself or others. When an individual does harm the dynamics, he will destroy himself in an effort to save those dynamics. This can be proven and has been proven in innumerable cases. It is this fact which evidences that man is basically good. On this basis, we have the concepts of right and wrong. When we speak of ethics, we are talking about right and wrong conduct. We are talking about good and evil. Good can be considered to be any constructive survival action. It happens that no construction can take place without some small destruction, just as the tenement must be torn down to make room for the new apartment building. To be good, something must contribute to the individual, to his family, his children, his group, mankind, or life. To be good, a thing must contain construction which outweighs the destruction it contains. A new cure which saves 100 lives and kills one is an acceptable cure. Good is survival. Good is being more right than one is wrong. Good is being more successful than one is unsuccessful along constructive lines. Things are good which complement the survival of the individual, his family, children, group, mankind, life, and mest. Acts are good which are more beneficial than destructive along these dynamics. Evil is the opposite of good and is anything which is destructive more than it is constructive along any of the various dynamics. A thing which does more destruction than construction is evil from the viewpoint of the individual, the future race, group, species, life, or mest that it destroys. When an act is more destructive than constructive, it is evil. It is out ethics. When an act assists succumbing more than it assists survival, it is an evil act in the proportion that it destroys. Good, bluntly, is survival. Ethical conduct is survival. Evil conduct is non-survival. Construction is good when it promotes survival. Construction is evil when it inhibits survival. Destruction is good when it enhances survival. An act or conclusion is as right as it promotes the survival of the individual, future race, group, mankind, or life making the conclusion. To be entirely right would be to survive to infinity. An act or conclusion is wrong to the degree that it is non-survival to the individual, future race, group, species, or life responsible for doing the act or making the conclusion. The most wrong a person can be on the first dynamic is dead. The individual or group which is, on the average, more right than wrong, since these terms are not absolutes by far, should survive. An individual who, on the average, is more wrong than right will succumb. While there could be no absolute right or absolute wrong, a right action would depend upon its assisting the survival of the dynamics immediately concerned. A wrong action would impede the survival of the dynamics concerned. Let us look at how these concepts of right and wrong fit into our current society. This is a dying society. Ethics have gone so far out and are so little understood that this culture is headed for succumb at a dangerous rate. A person is not going to come alive. This society is not going to survive unless ethics technology is gotten hold of and applied. When we look at inflation, the oil crisis, corruption of government, war, crime, insanity, drugs, sexual promiscuity, etc., we are looking at a culture on the way out. This is a direct result of individuals failing to apply ethics to their dynamics. It actually starts with individual ethics. Dishonest conduct is non-survival. Anything is unreasonable or evil which brings about the destruction of individuals, groups, or inhibits the future of the race. The keeping of one's word, when it has been sacredly pledged, is an act of survival, since one is then trusted, but only so long as he keeps his word. To the weak, to the cowardly, to the reprehensibly irrational, dishonesty and underhanded dealings, the harming of others, and the blighting of their hopes seem to be the only way of conducting life. Unethical conduct is actually the conduct of destruction and fear. Lies are told because one is afraid of the consequences should one tell the truth. Destructive acts are usually done out of fear. Thus, the liar is inevitably a coward, and the coward inevitably a liar. The sexually promiscuous woman, the man who breaks faith with his friend, the covetous pervert are all dealing in such non-survival terms that degradation and unhappiness are part and parcel of their existence. It probably seems quite normal and perfectly all right to some to live in a highly degraded society full of criminals, drugs, war, and insanity, where we are in constant threat of the total annihilation of life on this planet. Well, let me say that this is not normal, and it is not necessary. It is possible for individuals to lead happy, productive lives without having to worry about whether or not they're going to be robbed if they walk outside their door, or whether Russia is going to declare war on the United States. It is a matter of ethics. It is simply a matter of individuals applying ethics to their lives and having their dynamics in communication and surviving. Morals. Now we have ethics as survival, but what of such things as morals, ideals, love? Don't these things go above mere survival? No, they do not. Romantic novels and television teach us that the hero always wins and that good always triumphs. But it appears that the hero doesn't always win and that good does not always triumph. On a shorter view, we can see villainy triumphing all about us. The truth of the matter is that the villainy is sooner or later going to lose. One cannot go through life victimizing one's fellow beings and wind up anything but trapped. The victim himself. However, one doesn't observe this in the common course of life. One sees the villains succeeding everywhere, evidently amassing money, cutting their brother's throat, receiving the fruits of the courts, and coming to rule over men. Without looking at the final consequence of this, which is there just as certainly as the sun rises and sets, one begins to believe that evil triumphs, whereas one has been taught that only good triumphs. This can cause the person himself to have a failure and can actually cause his downfall. As for ideals, as for honesty, as for one's love of one's fellow man, one cannot find good survival for one or for many where these things are absent. The criminal does not survive well. The average criminal spends the majority of his adult years caged like some wild beast and guarded from escape by the guns of good marksmen. A man who is known to be honest is awarded survival, good jobs, good friends. And the man who has his ideals, no matter how thoroughly he may be persuaded to desert them, survives well only so long as he is true to those ideals. Have you ever seen a doctor who, for the sake of personal gain, begins to secretly attend criminals or peddle dope? That doctor does not survive long after his ideals are laid aside. Ideals, morals, ethics all fall within this understanding of survival. One survives so long as he is true to himself, his family, his friends, the laws of the universe. When he fails in any respect, his survival is cut down. In the modern dictionary, we find that ethics are defined as morals and morals are defined as ethics. These two words are not interchangeable. Morals should be defined as a code of good conduct laid down out of the experience of the race to serve as a uniform yardstick for the conduct of individuals and groups. Morals are actually laws. The origin of a moral code comes about when it is discovered through actual experience that some act is more non-survival than pro-survival. The prohibition of this act then enters into the customs of the people and may eventually become a law. In the absence of extended reasoning powers, moral codes, so long as they provide better survival for their group, are a vital and necessary part of any culture. Morals, however, become burdensome and protested against when they become outmoded. And although a revolt against morals may have as its stated target the fact that the code no longer is as applicable as it once was, revolts against moral codes generally occur because individuals of the group or the group itself has gone out ethics to a point where it wishes to practice license against these moral codes, not because the codes themselves are unreasonable. If a moral code were thoroughly reasonable, it could at the same time be considered thoroughly ethical. But only at this highest level could the two be called the same. The ultimate in reason is the ultimate in survival. Ethical conduct includes the adherence to the moral codes of the society in which we live. Justice. When an individual fails to apply ethics to himself and fails to follow the morals of the group, justice enters in. It is not realized generally that the criminal is not only antisocial but is also anti-self. A person who is out ethics, who has his dynamics out of communication, is a potential or active criminal in that crimes against the pro-survival actions of others are continually perpetrated. Crime might be defined as the reduction of the survival level along any one of the 8 dynamics. Justice is used when the individual's own out-ethics and destructive behavior begin to impinge too heavily on others. In a society run by criminals and controlled by incompetent police, the citizens reactively identify any justice action or symbol with oppression. But we have a society full of people who do not apply ethics to themselves, and in the absence of true ethics, one cannot live with others and life becomes miserable. Therefore, we have justice, which was developed to protect the innocent and decent. When an individual fails to apply ethics to himself and follow the moral codes, the society takes justice action against him. Justice, although it unfortunately cannot be trusted in the hands of man, has as its basic intention and purpose the survival and welfare of those it serves. Justice, however, would not be needed when you have individuals who are sufficiently sane and in ethics that they do not attempt to blunt others' survival. Justice would be used until a person's own ethics render him fit company for his fellows. Ethics, justice, and your survival. In the past, the subject of ethics has not really been mentioned very much. Justice was, however. Justice systems have long been used as a substitute for ethics systems. But when you try to substitute ethics for justice, you get into trouble. Man has not had an actual workable way of applying ethics to himself. The subjects of ethics and justice have been terribly aberrated. We now have the technology of ethics and justice straightened out. This is the only road out on the subject that man has. People have been trying to put ethics in on themselves for eons without knowing how. Ethics evolved with the individual's attempts at continued survival. When a person does something which is out ethics, harms his and others' survival, he tries to right this wrong. Usually he just winds up caving himself in. Caved in means mental and/or physical collapse to the extent that the individual cannot function causatively. They cave themselves in because in an effort to restrain themselves and stop themselves from committing more harmful acts, they start withdrawing and withholding themselves from the area they have harmed. A person who does this becomes less and less able to influence his dynamics and thus becomes a victim of them. It is noted here that one must have done to other dynamics those things which other dynamics now seem to have the power to do to him. Therefore, he is in a position to be injured and he loses control. He can become, in fact, a zero of influence and a vacuum for trouble. This comes about because the person does not have the basic technology of ethics. It has never been explained to him. No one ever told him how he could get out of the hole he's gotten himself into. This technology has remained utterly unknown. So he has gone down the chute. Ethics is one of the primary tools a person uses to dig himself out with. Whether he knows how to or not, every person will try to dig himself out. It doesn't matter who he is or what he's done, he's going to be trying to put ethics in on himself one way or the other. Even with Hitler and Napoleon, there were attempts at self-restraint. It's interesting in looking at the lives of these people how thoroughly they worked at self-destruction. The self-destruction is their attempt at applying ethics to themselves. They worked at this self-destruction on several dynamics. They can't put ethics in on themselves. They can't restrain themselves from doing these harmful acts, so they punish themselves. They realize they are criminals and cave themselves in. All beings are basically good and are attempting to survive as best they can. They are attempting to put ethics in on their dynamics. Ethics and justice were developed and exist to aid an individual in his urge towards survival. They exist to keep the dynamics in communication. The technology of ethics is the actual technology of survival. An individual's dynamics will be in communication to the degree that he is applying ethics to his life. If one knows and applies ethics technology to his life, he can keep the dynamics in communication and continuously increase his survival. That is why ethics exists, so that we can survive like we want to survive, by having our dynamics in communication. Ethics are not to be confused with justice. Justice is used only after a failure of the individual to use ethics on himself. With personal ethics in across the dynamics, justice disappears as a primary concern. That's where you get a world without crime. A man who steals from his employer has his third dynamic out of communication with his first dynamic. He is headed for a prison sentence or unemployment at best, which is not what one would call optimum survival on the first and second dynamic, not to mention the rest of them. He probably believes he is enhancing his survival by stealing, yet if he knew the technology of ethics, he would realize he is harming himself as well as others and will only end up further down the chute. The man who lies, the woman who cheats on her husband, the teenager who takes drugs, the politician who is involved in dishonest dealings, all are cutting their own throats. They are harming their own survival by having their dynamics out of communication and not applying ethics to their lives. It may come as a surprise to you, but a clean heart and clean hands are the only way to achieve happiness and survival. The criminal will never make it unless he reforms. The liar will never be happy or satisfied with himself until he begins dealing in truth. The optimum solution to any problem presented by life would be that which leads to increased survival on the majority of the dynamics. Thus, we see that a knowledge of ethics is necessary to survival. The knowledge and application of ethics is the way out of the trap of degradation and pain. We can, each and every one of us, achieve happiness and optimum survival for ourselves and others by using ethics technology. What happens if the dynamics go out ethics? It is important to remember that these dynamics comprise life. They do not operate singly without interaction with the other dynamics. Life is a group effort. None survive alone. If one dynamic goes out ethics, it goes out of communication with, to a greater or lesser degree, the other dynamics. In order to remain in communication, the dynamics must remain in ethics. Let us take the example of a woman who is totally withdrawn from the third dynamic. She won't have anything to do with any groups or the people of her town. She has no friends. She stays locked in her house all day thinking, with some misguided idea of independence or individuality, that she is surviving better on her first dynamic. Actually, she is quite unhappy and lonely and lives in fear of other human beings. To ease her misery and boredom, she begins to take sedatives and tranquilizers, which she becomes addicted to, and then starts drinking alcohol as well. She is busy solving her dilemma with further destructive actions. You can see how she has driven her first, second, and third dynamics out of communication. She is actively destroying her survival on her dynamics. These actions are out ethics in the extreme, and it would not be surprising if she eventually killed herself with the deadly combination of sedatives and alcohol. Or let us take the man who is committing destructive acts on the job. These acts need not be large. They can be as simple as showing up late for work, not doing as professional a job on each product as he is capable of, damaging equipment, or hiding things from his employer. He does not have to be overtly engaged in the total destruction of the company to know that he is committing harmful acts. Now, this man finds himself sliding more and more out ethics as time goes along. He feels he must hide more and more, and he does not know how to stop this downward spiral. Very likely it never even occurred to him that he could stop it. He is lacking the technology of ethics. He probably doesn't realize that his actions are driving his dynamics out of communication. This may affect his other dynamics in various ways. He will probably be a bit miserable, and since he is basically good, he will feel guilt. He goes home at night, and his wife says cheerily, "How was your day?" And he cringes a little and feels worse. He starts drinking to numb the misery. He is out of communication with his family. He is out of communication on his job. His performance at work worsens. He begins to neglect himself and his belongings. He no longer gets joy out of life. His happy and satisfying life slips away from him. Because he does not know and apply ethics technology to his life and his dynamics, the situation goes quite out of his control. He has unwittingly become the effect of his own out ethics. Unless he gets his life straightened out by using ethics, he will undoubtedly die a miserable man. Now I ask you, what kind of life is that? Unfortunately, it is all too common in our current times. A person cannot go out ethics on a dynamic without it having disastrous consequences on his other dynamics. It is really quite tragic, the tragedy being compounded by the fact that it is so unnecessary. If man only knew the simple technology of ethics, he could achieve for himself the self-respect, personal satisfaction, and success that he only believes himself capable of dreaming of, not attaining. Man is seeking survival. Survival is measured in pleasure. That means to most men, happiness, self-respect, the personal satisfaction of a job well done, and success. A man may have money, he may have a lot of personal belongings, etc., but he will not be happy unless he actually has his ethics in and knows he came by these things honestly. These rich political and financial criminals are not happy. They may be envied by the common man for their wealth, but they are very unhappy people who more often than not come to grief eventually through drug or alcohol addiction, suicide, or some other means of self-destruction. Let us look at the all too common current occurrence of out ethics on the second dynamic. This is generally thought to be perfectly acceptable behavior. It is easy to see how second dynamic out ethics affects the other dynamics. Let us say we have a young woman who is somewhat happily married and decides to have an affair with her boss, who happens to be a good friend of her husband. This is quite obviously out ethics, as well as against the law, although an amazing number of people would find this sort of behavior acceptable or mildly objectionable at most. This is quite a destructive act, however. She will suffer from guilt. She will feel deceitful and unhappy because she knows she has committed a bad act against her husband. Her relationship with him will certainly suffer, and since her boss is experiencing much the same thing in his home, she and her boss will begin to feel bad towards each other as they begin to target each other for their misfortune. Their dynamics end up quite messed up and out of communication. She will feel unhappy on her first dynamic as she has abandoned her own moral code. Her second dynamic will be out of communication, and she may even begin to find fault with and dislike her husband. The situation at work is strained as she is now out of communication with her boss and her fellow workers. Her boss has ruined his relationship and friendship with her husband. She is so embroiled in these three dynamics that they go totally out of communication with her fourth, fifth, and sixth dynamics. This is all the result of ethics going out on a single dynamic. The repercussions spread insidiously to all the dynamics. Our survival is assured only by our knowledge and application of ethics to our dynamics in order to keep them in communication. Through ethics, we can achieve survival and happiness for ourselves and for planet Earth. In closing, the true story of Scientology. The true story of Scientology is simple, concise, and direct. It is quickly told. 1. A philosopher developed a philosophy about life and death. 2. People find it interesting. 3. People find it works. 4. People pass it along to others. 5. It grows. When we examine this extremely accurate and very brief account, we see that there must be in our civilization some very disturbing elements for anything else to be believed about Scientology. These disturbing elements are the merchants of chaos. They deal in confusion and upset. Their daily bread is made by creating chaos. If chaos were to lessen, so would their incomes. The politician, the reporter, the medico, the drug manufacturer, the militarist and arms manufacturer, the police and the undertaker, to name the leaders of the list, fatten only upon the dangerous environment. Even individuals and family members can be merchants of chaos. It is to their interest to make the environment seem as threatening as possible, for only then can they profit. Their incomes, force, and power rise in direct ratio to the amount of threat they can inject into the surroundings of the people. With that threat, they can extort revenue, appropriations, heighten circulations, and recompense without question. These are the merchants of chaos. If they did not generate it and buy and sell it, they would, they suppose, be poor. For instance, we speak loosely of good press. Is there any such thing today? Look over a newspaper. Is there anything good on the front page? Rather, there is murder and sudden death, disagreement and catastrophe. And even that, bad as it is sensationalized to make it seem worse. This is the cold-blooded manufacture of a dangerous environment. People do not need this news, and if they did, they need the facts, not the upset. But if you hit a person hard enough, he can be made to give up money. That's the basic formula of extortion. That's the way papers are sold. The impact makes them stick. A paper has to have chaos and confusion. A news story has to have conflict, they say. So there is no good press. There is only bad press about everything. To yearn for good press is foolhardy in a society where the merchants of chaos reign. Look what has to be done to the true story of Scientology in order to make it a news story by modern press standards. Conflict must be injected where there is none. Therefore, the press has to dream up upset and conflict. Let us take the first line. How does one make conflict out of it? 1. A philosopher develops a philosophy about life and death. The chaos merchant has to inject one of several possible conflicts here. He is not a philosopher, they have to assert. They are never quite bold enough to say it is not a philosophy, but they can and do go on endlessly as their purpose compels them in an effort to invalidate the identity of the person developing it. In actual fact, the developer of the philosophy was very well grounded in academic subjects and the humanities, probably better grounded in formal philosophy alone than teachers of philosophy in universities. The one-man effort is incredible in terms of study and research hours, and is a record never approached in living memory. But this would not be considered newsworthy. To write the simple fact that a philosopher had developed a philosophy is not newspaper-type news, and it would not disturb the environment. Hence the elaborate news fictions about one above. Then take the second part of the true story. People find it interesting. It would be very odd if they didn't, as everyone asks these questions of himself and looks for the answers to his own beingness. And the basic truth of the answers is observable in the conclusions of Scientology. However, to make this news, it has to be made disturbing. People are painted as kidnapped or hypnotized and dragged as unwilling victims up to read the books or listen. The chaos merchant leaves 3 very thoroughly alone. It is dangerous ground for him. People find it works. No hint of workability would ever be attached to Scientology by the press, although there is no doubt in the press mind that it does work. That's why it's dangerous. It calms the environment. So any time spent trying to convince press Scientology works is time spent upsetting a reporter. On 4, people pass it along to others, press feels betrayed. Nobody should believe anything they don't read in the papers. How dare word of mouth exist? So to try to stop people from listening, the chaos merchant has to use words like cult. That's a closed group, whereas Scientology is the most open group on earth to anyone. And they have to attack organizations and their people to try to keep people out of Scientology. Now as for 5, it grows, we have the true objection. As truth goes forward, lies die. The slaughter of lies is an act that takes bread from the mouth of a chaos merchant. Unless he can lie with wild abandon about how bad it all is, he thinks he will starve. The world simply must not be a better place according to the chaos merchant. If people were less disturbed, less beaten down by their environments, there would be no new appropriations for police and armies and big rockets, and there'd be not even pennies for a screaming sensational press. So long as politicians move upward on scandal, police get more pay for more crime, medicos get fatter on more sickness, there will be merchants of chaos. They're paid for it. And their threat is the simple story of Scientology. For that is the true story. And behind its progress, there is a calmer environment in which a man can live and feel better. If you don't believe it, just stop reading newspapers for 2 weeks and see if you feel better. Suppose you had all such disturbances handled. The pity of it is, of course, that even the merchant of chaos needs us, not to get fatter, but just to live himself as a being. So the true story of Scientology is a simple story, and too true to be turned aside. Epilogue. My philosophy. The subject of philosophy is very ancient. The word means the love, study, or pursuit of wisdom or of knowledge of things and their causes, whether theoretical or practical. All we know of science or of religion comes from philosophy. It lies behind and above all other knowledge we have or use. For long regarded as a subject reserved for halls of learning and the intellectual, the subject to a remarkable degree has been denied the man in the street. Surrounded by protective coatings of impenetrable scholarliness, philosophy has been reserved to the privileged few. The first principle of my own philosophy is that wisdom is meant for anyone who wishes to reach for it. It is the servant of the commoner and king alike, and should never be regarded with awe. Selfish scholars seldom forgive anyone who seeks to break down the walls of mystery and let the people in. Will Durant, the modern American philosopher, was relegated to the scrap heap by his fellow scholars when he wrote a popular book on the subject, The Story of Philosophy. Thus, brickbats come the way of any who seek to bring wisdom to the people over the objections of the inner circle. The second principle of my own philosophy is that it must be capable of being applied. Learning locked in mildewed books is of little use to anyone, and therefore of no value unless it can be used. The third principle is that any philosophic knowledge is only valuable if it is true or if it works. These three principles are so strange to the field of philosophy that I have given my philosophy a name: Scientology. This means only knowing how to know. A philosophy can only be a route to knowledge. It cannot be knowledge crammed down one's throat. If one has a route, he can then find what is true for him, and that is Scientology. Know thyself, and the truth shall set you free. Therefore, in Scientology, we are not concerned with individual actions and differences. We are only concerned with how to show man how he can set himself or herself free. This, of course, is not very popular with those who depend upon the slavery of others for their living or power, but it happens to be the only way I have found that really improves an individual's life. Suppression and oppression are the basic causes of depression. If you relieve those, a person can lift his head, become well, become happy with life. And though it may be unpopular with the slave master, it is very popular with the people. Common man likes to be happy and well. He likes to be able to understand things, and he knows his route to freedom lies through knowledge. Therefore, since 1950, I have had mankind knocking on my door. It has not mattered where I have lived or how remote. Since I first published a book on the subject, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, published in May 1950. My life has no longer been my own. I like to help others and count it as my greatest pleasure in life to see a person free himself of the shadows which darken his days. These shadows look so thick to him and weigh him down so that when he finds they are shadows and that he can see through them, walk through them, and be again in the sun, he is enormously delighted. and I am afraid I am just as delighted as he is. I have seen much human misery. As a very young man, I wandered through Asia and saw the agony and misery of overpopulated and undereducated lands. I have seen people uncaring and stepping over dying men in the streets. I have seen children less than rags and bones. And amongst this poverty and degradation, I found holy places where wisdom was great, but where it was carefully hidden and given out only as superstition. Later, in Western universities, I saw a man obsessed with materiality, and with all his cunning, I saw him hide what little wisdom he really had in forbidding halls and make it inaccessible to the common and less favored man. I have been through a terrible war and saw its terror and pain uneased by a single word of decency or humanity. I have lived no cloistered life, and hold in contempt the wise man who has not lived and the scholar who will not share. There have been many wiser men than I, but few have traveled as much road. I have seen life from the top down and the bottom up. I know how it looks both ways, and I know there is wisdom and that there is hope. Blinded with injured optic nerves and lame with physical injuries to hip and back at the end of World War II, I faced an almost non-existent future. My service record states, this officer has no neurotic or psychotic tendencies of any kind whatsoever. But it also states, permanently disabled physically. And so there came a further blow. I was abandoned by family and friends as a supposedly hopeless cripple and a probable burden upon them for the rest of my days. I yet worked my way back to fitness and strength in less than 2 years, using only what I knew and could determine about man and his relationship to the universe. I had no one to help me. What I had to know, I had to find out. And it's quite a trick studying when you cannot see. I became used to being told it was all impossible, that there was no way, no hope. Yet I came to see again and walk again, and I built an entirely new life. It is a happy life, a busy one, and I hope a useful one. My only moments of sadness are those which come when bigoted men tell others all is bad, and there is no root anywhere, no hope anywhere, nothing but sadness and sameness and desolation, and that every effort to help others is false. I know it is not true. So my own philosophy is that one should share what wisdom he has, one should help others to help themselves, and one should keep going despite heavy weather, for there is always a calm ahead. One should also ignore catcalls from the selfish intellectual who cries, "Don't expose the mystery. Keep it all for ourselves. The people cannot understand." But as I have never seen wisdom do any good kept to oneself, and as I like to see others happy, and as I find the vast majority of the people can and do understand, I will keep on writing and working and teaching so long as I exist. For I know no man who has any monopoly upon the wisdom of this universe. It belongs to those who can use it to help themselves and others. If things were a little better known and understood, we would all lead happier lives. And there is a way to know them, and there is a way to freedom. The old must give way to the new. Falsehood must become exposed by truth. And truth, though fought, always in the end prevails.